For 35 long years, he gave everything, blood, sweat, and tears, and when it was all over, that moment felt empty. All his work was like that, a needle so thin it pierced without pain, gears smaller than a grain of rice, craftsmanship more delicate than a strip of banknote, and all this was born thanks to world-class Japanese precision. A legacy created by the hands of craftsmen, people like him. At Fujimura Manufacturing, a man in business attire clashed with an elderly craftsman. Takuma Fujimura, now 70 years old, stood against him with unwavering determination because the deal was impossible, the payment humiliatingly small, and the deadline absurdly short. Fujimura immediately rejected it. The visitor ignored his protest, since there were others, simpler, cheaper, and more obedient, and from the very beginning he considered Fujimura and the like outdated and inconvenient. For him, old-school skills had no place in the modern market. It was not about craftsmanship, it was about efficiency. Men like Fujimura should be grateful even to be considered, and this arrogance drove him mad, so he sharply grabbed the man by the collar. He dedicated his life to perfecting his craft and took pride in every creation. He would never do something he could not be proud of, even for money. He often told the man he was full. The visitor stepped back and promised to take revenge through corporate channels. He said that this quarrel would not go unpunished, but the damage had already been done. Fujimura's prospects had almost vanished. He stood alone and looked at the clock. What next? Who would hire a 70-year-old man without connections, without family, and without support? He shook his weathered hands. Hands that knew only this one world, the world of machines, precision, metal, and discipline. He had no idea what would come next. He still thought he would somehow manage. It had always been that way. He went outside. Standing in front of the building into which he had poured his whole soul, Fujimura Manufacturing. The very name contained a whole life of memories, mistakes, lessons, and victories. He had traveled the path from apprentice to master and became an independent craftsman. He had seen the best and the worst. If nothing else, perhaps his life had been well lived. But one regret haunted him. He wanted at least once to test his skills with his own hands on the world stage and see how far his mastery reached. He reached out to take down the wooden sign, but his body gave out. Suddenly, a sharp pain gripped his chest. He fell. He realized too late how little he had cared for his body. His breathing weakened, his vision dimmed. He thought of only one thing, that there was still time. But then everything changed. He found himself face down on a surface that was not concrete. It smelled of grass. The wind rustled in the trees. Unfamiliar sounds in the sky which he did not recognize. The world around had changed. He did not know where he was. This was not Japan and not the world he knew. He raised his head. Fujimura sat upright. Somehow, without even noticing, he became younger. His gaze fell on a castle. He watched passively. A semi-transparent screen appeared before him. Mikaeu, I am from the master craftsman. He turned and saw something like his workshop. He looked at his hands and noticed that the clothes had become too large, the jacket's sleeves hanging down, uncertainly, as if it was not about him. It made no sense. He was sure he had fainted in the parking lot, and now he was here, in clothes too big for his small body. He rolled up his sleeves to his elbows. A sharp clang of metal reached his ears. He turned toward the sound and saw a figure striking a sword against a wooden log. It was a woman, a Frau von Freya, a healer. She was breathing heavily and was clearly tired. But she took up the log again. This time her prosthetic arm detached and she fell to the ground with a foggy thought, clenched her jaws, and looked at the fallen branch. Fujimura looked around the place and took out her prosthetic arm. He approached and called out, asking where they were. She flinched from the surprise. He said he was lost and asked her to be patient and listen to him. She blinked, embarrassed by his choice of words. Old Cut did not quite understand the reaction. Later they entered what he considered his workshop. He thought to himself, this must be a dream. Some dream that took him back to Picky Boy abroad in Europe. That castle clearly looked European, and he had never even been outside Japan. Freya interrupted his thoughts and asked if he was okay. Earlier he seemed depressed, but he waved it off, insisting that nothing had happened, then focused on the device in front of him. He was tightening a screw. He handed it to her and asked her to try it on, adding that it was just something he had made in a hurry. Freya's eyes widened as soon as she put the arm in place. The new prosthetic clinked slightly against her arm, and she was even more surprised. She was impressed. The balance and smoothness seemed natural, light but stable, and the movements were complete. She couldn't believe he had made it in such a short time. She compared it to the dwarves from legends. These mythical craftsmen were known as skilled blacksmiths. He became interested and asked her to tell more. She explained that these dwarfs were considered messengers of the gods and creators of legendary weapons given to heroes. Freya continued enthusiastically and told about the magical weapon forged to seal the Demon King, a sword that summoned a destructive lightning, a staff that raised the dead, and a shield that averted disaster. Freya explained that even all the legendary weapons in the world changed little. The Demon King's army was reborn and marched out again. She dreamed of becoming a great heroine who uses such a weapon. But reality was much harsher. She was just a helpless healer. Recently, she was even kicked out of the group. Now she traveled alone as an independent adventurer and forced herself to learn swordsmanship here and there. Having only one hand. Even this was a hard struggle, but she still laughed. Fujimura, listening, began to wonder what this person was even talking about. Eventually, he realized that he had probably stumbled upon someone's strange, funny delusion, some fantastic nonsense. It couldn't be otherwise. On television, dreams usually end with some abrupt finale. He hit himself in the face so hard that his cheek turned blue, and blood came from his nose. Pain pierced him. He held his face and grimaced. Freya ran up worriedly. She used healing magic. A soft light appeared around his wound, and the bruises gradually disappeared. She sighed with relief. He recovered. Healing magic was the only thing she could truly be proud of. Even then, it was partly thanks to her staff, a valuable family relic. It contained a rare Class B magical stone, a lantern crystal, something even this country lacked. He turned away. She called him Mr. Fujimura. His eyes widened. He reached for a cigarette, lit it, and immediately began coughing heavily. His eyes widened again. It was no longer just an indistinct feeling. Freya kept calling after him as he stumbled and moved forward. She asked where he was going. He raised his head. She called him again, and then he realized that this was not just a dream. Somehow he found himself in a completely different world. Demonic kings, heroes, and enchanted relics were real here, and it is hard to imagine a 70-year-old man in such a fantasy adventure, because in reality he was no longer 70, he had become a child. A complete fresh start. He thought about how to earn money here, and suddenly the idea of weapons appeared. If the decisive factor was not quantity but power, then he would have to make better, his own weapons. He turned to Freya and extended his hand. He asked her to lend him her staff, and she was shocked. He told her it would be only for 2 or 3 months. She shook her head. She could not. It was a treasure of her family. She sincerely apologized. This answer stunned him. She quickly tried to soften the blow, noticing how close he was to tears. The expression on his face moved her, and if he continued to look like that, she felt she might really give in. Later, Fujimura thanked him, saying that from a person who strives to become a hero, he expected this, and promised that this old man would take good care of the staff. Freya was still hesitant and explained again that she was only lending it. While they talked, she asked if he wanted anything else. Fujimura paused for a moment and thought it was reasonable. He suggested returning to the workshop, having a snack, and if she had a book about this world, to lend it to him as well. She just nodded, showing she understood. Fujimura was considering his situation. At least he understood the language and seemed to be able to read the signs. Freya said she was returning to the city for a short time. He agreed and called her a girl. She corrected him and said her name was Frau. Before leaving, she warned never to go close to the northern mountains, especially at night. There were reports of strange phenomena there, something called Ilas. Fujimura became interested and asked what it was. Freya explained that it was a demon of the night that had previously destroyed many villages, a bat-like creature with a triple subjugation rank B. Supposedly, the Knights of the Kingdom destroyed it several years ago, but recently more and more people have been seeing it again. Fujimura simply replied yes, and this irritated Freya. She reminded him that it was not a trivial matter. It was about a triple threat. He told her to shut up because he already had too much to do. She quietly apologized. This was the fantasy world of Elvani, a place where minerals play a special and powerful role. Among the most valuable resources were magical stones, crystalline substances that produced electricity, heat, or light when mana was directed into them, were essentially natural batteries and formed the basis of the world's magic, used in everything from everyday life to war. Fujimura decided to poke around with him, holding a strange mineral in his hand. Its texture and behavior did not fit logic, but a mineral is a mineral. He will understand this later. He was holding a chisek again, the eye of analysis. It gleamed in his palm as he focused on it. The jam began to glow, illuminating the surrounding stones. Then it caught fire. Frightened, he stared at it. This thing was on a completely different level than the rest, maybe a glowing stone, so he took a saw and began to saw it. When he was cutting, small shavings fell onto the table. Immediately, a crackling sound was heard, particles rose into the air, and a dazzling flash occurred. Further, they discovered something important. Inside the stone was a crystal core of high purity. It occupied only 20% of the stone's internal volume, The rest served as limiters and suppressed its magical effect. So magic in this world was diluted, and what people considered magic was only a fraction, just 1/10 of the original energy. The true potential was sealed. The chip from this stone exploded from the slightest amount of magic. The consistency of the stone was sticky and unstable, and it reminded him of real materials like titanium or inconel, both known for being difficult to cut due to their strength and poor thermal conductivity. It was supposed to be a challenge, and Fujimura gladly accepted it. Metalworking itself was a complex art. First they prepared materials and tools, then cut, then shaped, finally drilled and cut threads, and mastering these steps was not just following instructions but required the intuition of the master, choosing the right tool, the necessary effort, and quick decisions. To be exceptional, a true master had to sense even the slightest changes in sound, resistance or heat, subtle metal distortion, its deformation under load, and even warmth on the skin surface, and he perceives all this intuitively. They make instant adjustments without hesitation. Thanks to this, the quality and accuracy of their work significantly exceed what machines can provide. Fujimura exhaled, an explosion sounded nearby from somewhere, but he did not even flinch and simply continued working, during which he smoked several cigarettes. Until the next morning. The work is done. He looked at it and thought for a whole 3 days. It had been a long time since he subjected his body to such strain. He glanced at his hand. Something was wrong. This was not the body he remembered. The muscles were not tired at all. Instead, burden pressed on his mind. His head foggy from fatigue, strange visual cues appeared in his field of vision, flickering like phantom text, ranking in Eye of the Alchemist, Super Recovery, Super Focus, Shinteikuka Body Reinforcement, Heat Resistance, Godlike Reflexes, Eye of Prediction, Skill Addition, Manoregulation. Poison Resistance. He felt confused and decided to go outside to breathe fresh air. Outside he stretched. His thoughts went to Freya, a girl who called herself a healer without powers. Expelled from the party, she now travels alone as an adventurer. She had only one hand with a prosthesis, and no matter how much she trained, she was at a significant disadvantage. Starting with a non-combat role only complicated the situation. He was alone too, so perhaps it was not worth being so critical. He noticed a faint flicker nearby, a stone embedded in the ground. Interested, he picked it up. From that moment of discovery, extraction and manufacture of core stones became the foundation of a new technological era of Elvani, and he had just taken the first step. Later that same day, Fru came to his workshop and greeted him, then reminded him that today was the last day to return her staff. Not hearing a response, she thought he was not there. Then she noticed him on the floor, lying and snoring. Frightened, she called his name. He woke up confused. He noticed her and asked her to wait a minute while he made coffee, thanked her and said the staff had been very helpful. She put the coffee aside, and he settled on the sofa. On the table next to Satish lay a strange, unfamiliar object. She pointed at it and asked what this suspicious cylindrical thing was. He indifferently replied that it was a gun, smiled, and said he had dreamed of making one since childhood, despite the laws. Her attention quickly became serious, and most importantly, they needed to find her staff. Fujimura pointed across the room and said it was right there. He asked her what she thought about it. Now it looked more stylish. Before him lay a weapon optimized for work, streamlined, efficient, and destructive, a combination of design and lethality, the world's first magical pistol with barrel and bullets made from his own corn metal. He even made the barrel himself. He leaned back and quietly admired his own genius, but Fru was frightened. She screamed and demanded an explanation of what he had done, begged to immediately return everything as it was. But Fujimura shook his head. He could not. The staff had now practically merged with the iron. He pointed with his hand at something nearby. When she looked, she fell silent. He moved away. Fabric covering. He discovered a cache of glowing stones. The ground around slightly glowed. He explained that it was quite strange and that he could extract as many magical stones from this place as he wanted. She froze and stared. Each one was real. She was completely stunned and could not understand how he found this place. Fujimura examined the stones, and when asked how, he simply replied that he looked closely. Inside the stones, he noticed some kind of glow. Not only that, everything, components, strength, thermal conductivity, characteristics, magical traits, even names, classes, and the exact location of the core in the rock, as well as where and how to process it, appeared clearly before him as if on a map, and he did not feel this as deception. Rather, he thought that people in this world naturally see so well. No, this must be a consequence of coming here. His vision changed. He looked differently. His eyes opened wider, and it was not only physical. Freya was confused and did not understand what he was talking about. He blinked, she trembled. She said that no one had such divine eyes and all those skills and crafts. She did not know who he really was. Later, in the workshop, the ground trembled, an explosion sounded. Fujimura ran out to check and assumed that a rocket might have hit them. Freya, to understand what was happening, asked him to step back a little and wait, then she raised her head. A monster was sitting on the roof of the workshop. She froze, it had no eyes. It was here in the middle of the day. Then she realized that it was about the stones. The magical stones could have been attracted by their aura, and the eyeless one let out a deafening scream. Freya panicked, they had to run away. It was too dangerous. Fujimura, unafraid, said that if she didn't deal with that stupid monster, it would punch a hole in her roof. Another woman shouted that it would punch a hole in his. She reminded him again. It was the same night demon that once destroyed the entire region, and now it was a colossal queen-class creature. They had no chance. Fujimura calmly loaded the pistol. He said, "Really?" Freya insisted that they flee immediately. He kept loading. She said that if it was so dangerous, she better take it out now. She looked at him and said, "Deal with it." She repeated it distrustfully. The eyeless creature spread its wings. It flew off the roof and flew up to them, landing with a heavy, dull thud right in front of them. Freya's eyes froze on his twisted mouth. Pure horror. Without hesitation, Fujimura handed her the pistol. He explained how to hold it. Hold it like this. Relax. It's light and comfortable in the hand. Just aim the barrel at the target. Concentrate some mana. Take your index finger and press the trigger. She hesitated, shook her head. She couldn't do it. She was a healer, support in the rear, not a fighter. No, she froze and trembled. Holding the weapon was scary. Fujimura stood in front of her and positioned himself between her and Isla's. She gasped, and the monster too. He was doing something and standing very close. He just smiled. "Believe in it," he said. Believe in the craft to which he had dedicated 54 years. Years of his life and two. Freya's eyes quickly looked at him, then at the weapon. The eyeless one went again. She raised her eyes. It was now rushing straight at them. Fujimura warned her to be ready. She shuddered, but then raised the pistol and with trembling hands aimed it at the creature. The eyeless roared. Freya's thoughts raced. He did not believe that this tiny cylinder could withstand that. The monster was fenced off. It was locked inside. Fujimura shouted fire. Her hands trembled. She pulled the trigger. The bullet flew. A strong, dazzling explosion occurred on impact. Freya froze, not believing her eyes. The eyeless monster, a threat hard to imagine face to face, now lay motionless on the ground. She had defeated it, and she did not immediately realize what had happened. Meanwhile, Fujimura calmly examined the aftermath with quiet satisfaction. Exit stability test completed. He attributed it to his patented magic stone manufacturing technology. It was not just a weapon, but a sophisticated magical device. It concentrated all the excess energy leakage, which usually gets lost in a wand, and directed it into one focused explosion. He carefully thought through every detail, the main projectile as the primary attack element, the core barrel for spinning the shot to increase speed and range, and the magic stone shell that restrained energy release until the moment of firing. He named it Bakuin Fujimura, a name as explosive as its purpose. The patent application was submitted. Freya looked at the device. It was stunning, too powerful. Too dangerous. Fujimura smiled and said it gave him quite a headache. The output was unstable for a long time, and he had lost count of how many times during development it almost killed him. But now finally everything was ready, and by the way, when discharged, it could still be used for healing, like her old staff. He offered her to try. Freya wanted to object, but fell silent, noticing his gaze. Fujimura carelessly approached the pile of fallen eyeless creatures and looked around the place where his discarded prototypes had gathered. Apparently, he had been conducting tests here for 3 months. He proudly said that his invention was safe, practical, and suitable for everyone, from children to the elderly. For him, it was the perfect tool. Then he turned to Freya. His face radiated energy. He said she better get ready because he was going to make her the strongest heroine in the world. Freya could not understand it. It made no sense. Fujimura continued and said that he would show his skills to the whole world, and their main reward would be the Demon King himself, plain and simple. She will become the heroine of her dreams. He will be recognized as the greatest master the world has ever seen, beneficial for both. He laughed. Freya was caught off guard. She did not understand what this man was even saying. Her thoughts were swirling. Everything was so far from reality that she could not keep up with it. Then he reached out his hand to her. She hesitated and did not dare to try because something so legendary seemed impossible to her. But Fujimura smiled and encouraged her. He said that now all that remains is to prepare to become a hero. This was a turning point. Freya was stunned. He spoke about the Demon King as if it were an ordinary matter. Although his words seemed absurd, there was something in this remarkable craftsman that made her heart beat faster, and she felt its pounding in her chest. Then she slowly stretched out her hand and took his hand. She said that if he really could do it, she would follow him to the end. Fujimura Grand firmly shook her hand. He said it was time to set off and astonish the world. The monster raged and destroyed everything around. Chaos reigned on the battlefield. The man sharply gave the order, do not let him escape. If they manage to overcome this creature, their party will be able to gain rank. He urged Thrall, as he called Freya, to hurry and be ready to heal. But Freya did not look at the fight. She hugged the wounded child and urgently directed healing magic at him. The man saw this and became angry, called her worthless trash, and scolded her for spending magic on a dirty peasant. There was contempt in his eyes. Freya begged. If she did not act now, the child would die. Her protest did not matter. The monster suddenly attacked cruelly. Their eyes opened wide as the blow rushed toward them. Later, when the chaos subsided, Freya woke up with her head bandaged. When her vision cleared, she saw the same man above her. He coldly said that she had finally woken up. Then words were spoken that shattered what was left of her world, and she was no longer needed by them. He said that she always interfered. Because of her, their prey escaped. He called her a stupid bitch, and now she had to pay for it. Everything she had accumulated until then was confiscated. Her adventure rank was erased, and she was once again at the bottom. He looked at her contemptuously, seeing how she had turned from B-rank support into discarded baggage. This was her story now. She was left alone. He told her to do whatever she wanted with her worthless life. Freya woke up with tears in her eyes. She sat up in bed, overwhelmed with emotions, but thoughts of her mother calmed her. She imagined the response. Mom does everything as always, full of energy and still dreams of becoming a heroine. This time not alone. Now she stood beside a miracle worker from another world. At that moment, Fujimura was crafting at the workbench and had just finished another invention, the megaphone. Freya held it with interest and asked what it was. Fujimura explained that it was a device that amplifies sound. A device that converts electrical signals into physical vibrations and essentially amplifies her voice. He called it the Fujimura speaker. He pointed to the parts. He used one core as the top plate and another as the magnet for the main coil. From turning to plastic processing, there was no core he couldn't shape now, just like before. Turning is the work of tools for cutting and grinding materials, and plastic processing is heating and forming. Pressure to shape them. He asked Freya to try. A little mana, one trigger press and speak. Freya hesitated but then tried. Her voice burst through the megaphone like thunder. The sound thundered. She flinched and covered her ears. It seemed as if lightning struck nearby. Fujimura Grant, output settings complete. He pondered aloud. These magic stones were truly incredible. With proper use, their potential was almost limitless. Maybe next he would build an engine. Freya shuddered. Then she had a doubt. She asked why she had to defeat the Demon King, and noted that it would be faster if he did it himself, since he performs miracles. If anyone deserved to be a hero, it was him, not her. Fujimura answered without hesitation. He did not want to become a hero. For him, being a hero was like the work of an actor, exhausting, with constant attention and expectations. It was too troublesome. Moreover, it would be much more interesting if she became the heroine. A woman, a healer, and one-armed. It was a convincing and even commercially attractive image. No matter how she looked at it, the master's place was behind the scenes. That was where he felt best. In the end, the main thing was simple. People used what he had made and were satisfied with the result. That was enough for him. He changed the subject. To get moving, Tom suggested they go to the city. Freya was surprised. She did not expect Fujimura to want to go to the city. Her reaction made him stop. He noticed her hesitation. But after a moment, Freya calmed down and agreed. They set off, and soon both reached their destination. Freya introduced him to Roraso Codornia, the capital of the region. Buildings stood along busy roads. The city was bustling with life. Merchants called out to buyers. Animals clattered through the streets. Laughter and conversations echoed everywhere. Guards stood at posts, and people bustled about at the festival. Fujimura observed everything. His eyes widened. This was the sky he called a true delight for the eyes. Everything around was unfamiliar and exotic. He reached out to a dog and jokingly called Fido to give his paw. Freya pulled him aside and quietly whispered that they should not attract attention. His foreign appearance already made him too noticeable. Fujimura replied that she looked strange. Under the scorching sun, she was so wrapped up, probably sweating there. Embarrassed, Freya said she was hiding her face and laughed awkwardly. He fell silent for a moment and remembered her face. When they first met, he noticed burned scars, and she quietly confirmed it. She thought he probably enjoyed speaking so freely about what was on his mind. Immediately a commotion started behind them. Two men stood facing each other. One shouted, demanding to know who owned what killed the other. The man with the horn replied mockingly, calling the first a snotty deranker. People began to gather around. Someone said a fight was about to start. The swordsman deranker against the marine rank spearman. Fujimura Grant, he casually placed 5,000 Indo on the list user. They said it was like a holiday here, but Freya shook her head. Rarasa was actually just a small kingdom, and although it was called the royal capital, it was usually a quiet provincial town. But recently everything changed. A second dungeon appeared in Kotornia. Freya explained its meaning. 100 years ago, a dungeon called Cavern Pass in Bowhead appeared. Dungeons are underground labyrinths that, as they say, have existed since the beginning of the world, differing in terrain, structure, and complexity in various countries, some stretching for hundreds of levels and becoming increasingly dangerous the deeper you go, but all of them share one unchanging truth: the promise of monsters and treasures. Allure still gave birth to new heroes. Dungeons attracted people and adventurers drawn by dreams of wealth, fame, and the unknown. When adventurers gathered, trade and culture followed, and cities and towns grew around these mysterious ruins. And now for this newly appeared dungeon. The next day, a qualifying tournament called Fast will be held. It was a competition for the right to explore it first, because in the world of adventurers, the one who entered the dungeon first gained the right to all the treasures inside, and that is why Feist wanted to be the first to encounter the unknown. There were rumors that the dungeon held so many treasures it would be enough to conquer an entire country. A true heroic saga. Fujimura nodded. This settled the matter. They will participate in the tournament. They will take advantage of this opportunity. Perhaps they will even find a few interesting new stones. Freya's eyes widened in disbelief. It was impossible. Travelers from all over the country, and even from neighboring kingdoms, would gather. According to the rules, groups of up to 5 people were allowed, but there were only 2 of them. Worse still, teams of level A would compete. She knew well how small their chances were. Fujimura did not flinch. He told Freya not to worry. She had a weapon of absolute destruction, and Bakufuji was on her side. But Freya was scared, because if she used such a powerful weapon in a public place, she would probably be arrested in front of everyone for mass murder. She didn't even notice that she said it out loud. Then someone nearby noticed her. Fujimura looked around and noticed Freya. Even more people were watching. Someone else confirmed it. Yes, it's her. Those burn scars give her away. It's Freya the traitor. They whispered about her, saying she abandoned her team in the middle of the fight and ran away. She used to be a rank B adventurer, but now she was just a lonely F ranker. No one trusted such a traitor. And worse, when she was running away, a monster caught up with her and she barely escaped, losing an arm, and people whispered that she was a disgrace to adventurers. Fujimura heard everything, smiled, patted Freya on the back, and said it was worth just ignoring such people, like adults do, but the crowd kept talking and discussing that cheeky chatterbox. He was definitely not from her new group, probably just some lost boy, looks a bit dumb, small mean eyes, maybe a new kind of goblin. Fujimura raised an eyebrow, looked at the goblin, and ordered Freya to hand over the pistol. Suddenly he wanted to try the rapid-fire mode. Freya quickly stopped him. No, he was not in the right condition now. Then another group approached. One of them sneered and said it was strange to see such a familiar face here. He added that it was nice to see that Freya, as always, was useless. Freya's eyes widened. She recognized that voice. It was her former A-rank team. The man who was speaking was Valk Donner, master of 2 swords. The people around them cheered. Well, that's Sword Flash, of course. They say they are about to reach S-rank. They are the pride of Raraso and the main favorites for Fast. Freya lowered her eyes in shame, and Valk pretended to be friendly and said it was nostalgic to see her again. Then he teased her, saying that this little rascal was the best she could find for a new party. He leaned in and whispered that someone like her would never be able to gather a real team after the rumors he spread. Freya's eyes widened in shock. Now she remembered. He was the one who spread the rumors that destroyed her. Vox said that although she was considered trash, she was a decent healer. It would be a shame if she joined someone else. That's why he made sure she couldn't. Freya was silent. Valk turned around and left, advising her to keep diligently chasing her dream of becoming a heroine, added another cruel remark that her dear mother was watching from heaven, and laughing, walked away. Fujimura looked irritated. He muttered that Frey never told him about such a scoundrel as Falk. The crowd fell silent because that guy just called Valkazurk. Valk turned and looked at him. Fujimura straightened up and said that he didn't care about all that A in Beer Inc., that judging people by rank or appearance is simply foolish. He even called Valky Kid. Everyone was shocked, even you. People started complaining. That guy is cheeky. He is the real boy here. Apologize to Valk, the little goblin. We need to find out which school he attended. Everyone encouraged Vok to put Fujimura in his place. Vox Goft said that Fujimura was exactly what he expected from an accomplice of a traitor, immature and disrespectful. Then he changed the subject. Since they were here, it meant that they would also participate in the qualifying tournament. Fujimura smiled. Exactly. The young lady, no. Vok smirked, so good luck. Make sure no accidents happen. Fujimura grinned back, and to you. Let the guest go, she called his name in shock. Later at the arena. The air was filled with excitement. People filled the seats and shouted loudly. In the center stood adventurers, ready for adventure. Guards and knights were under close watch. These are the same ones who started a fight with Shurden, the F-level healer, and that loud guy. Who he is unclear. His clothes are strange and it seems smoke comes from his mouth. Somewhere far away, Lies quietly smiled. Ahead the knight unfurled a scroll. Music played in the background. The knight read out the announcement. And then the crowd rumbled. The phase selection tournament officially began. Fujimura contacted Freya to find out the fastest way to defeat the Demon King. Freya was surprised by his phrase about the fastest way. Fujimura explained that a good master always strives for speed because it is the pride of their profession, and Freya later explained this. Regardless of intentions, Fujimura must first reach SS rank to even step into the domain of the Demon King. Only then can he proceed. She told about the Elite Sun rank, a title belonging to the 7 best adventurers in the world, and that these people carried the hopes of humanity and had exclusive access to Azuma, the most dangerous front against demons. They were not just adventurers, but almost true heroes. Elsewhere in the center of a large arena, the phase selection tournament was about to begin. The knight announced the start and asked those willing to enter the arena. Among the crowd, someone glanced at Freya, and a chill ran down her spine. Anxiety overwhelmed her, and she doubted whether she should be in such a hostile and threatening place. Whispers spread among the spectators. Mocking voices recognized her, and Fujimura, ridiculed that no one helped her and some child, said that they seriously went into conflict with Shurden and clearly underestimated fast. Freya quietly doubted herself and her right to stand there. She nervously bumped into someone. A towering man in full armor. He noticed the impact and became puzzled. Freya froze in horror. Another adventurer indignantly drew his sword and demanded to know who dared to behave so rudely. Frightened, Freya hid behind Fujimura and began apologizing again and again. The large man looked at Fujimura, called him his own, and fell silent. Then he looked at Fujimura with exaggerated concern, aloud wondering what children were doing in such a place, and decided that perhaps he was lost. Where his parents were not, the nights were empty. The poor child trembled with fear. But Fujimura did not tremble with fear. He boiled with rage. He tightly clamped Freya's mouth and addressed the giant with a sharp and confrontational voice, ordered him to listen carefully, and called him a megagazer. Then with full confidence, he introduced himself and Freya, saying that their names were sacred and they were destined to crush the Demon King. The crowd laughed. The word megagazer caused several smiles, but mostly they considered Fujimura's statement absurd. In their opinion, this madman was talking nonsense, typical delirium from the traitors' party. The invader, the huge man, smiling sarcastically replied, saying it was nice to see children still daring to dream. Disdainful and contemptuous whispers continued from the crowd. Met the gaze of a massive man without blinking. Suddenly the big man exhaled a disgusting, strong breath. Groans and grumbles sounded from the people nearby, and Fujimura, dissatisfied, coldly said that this lousy old man was trying to pull something again. The huge man looked at Fujimura and noticed a sharpness in his eyes that an ordinary warrior does not have. Then without warning, his tone and manner changed. He respectfully bowed his head, addressing Fujimura as a master, and apologized for just treating him like a child. He introduced himself as Gandalf, the leader of an adventure party of level B called Gardener, and pointed to 2 warriors behind him, the twin swordsmen Jin and Ken. Gandalf officially greeted Fujimura and Freya and expressed hope that if they meet at a future qualifying tournament, their fight would be fair and fierce, and they would fight with all their might. The spectators burst into applause. The word heated rolled through the crowd, then laughter sounded. The mood changed. Freya noted that Gandalf seemed like a strangely decent person. Fujimura was silent. I was sharp and mysterious. Above the arena, a knight watched the hustle. His thoughts wandered. Finally, it was the phase selection tournament. He somewhat regretted not placing a bet. In Coternia, it is always there that the current favorite is under the influence of Shurden. He quickly counted in his head. If he left the post now, he would still have time to place a bet. But then he changed his mind because the captain does not tolerate jokes, and serious problems will follow for repeated idleness. Suddenly something caught his attention under the fortress. Movement stirred in the trees, and figures emerged from the shadows of the forest. At first 3, then more and more. Monsters swarmed, and his eyes widened in horror. He struck the alarm bell and shouted a warning, and horde of monsters appeared. Below, Fujimura noticed a sudden alarm. Confused, he muttered under his breath. Freya assumed that they were probably wearing masks. Fujimura asked what that meant. Freya explained that the exact reasons were unknown, but when a new dungeon appears, it somehow excites the local monsters, and sometimes they gather in crowds and rush to the dungeon, a phenomenon called the masked, and Fujimura calmly reacted, dryly commenting on this turn of fate. Freya reassured him. Although they were on the border, this was still the royal capital. Royal knights stood here, and many strong adventurers had gathered for the tournament. The monsters would be driven off or lose interest before causing serious problems. Several more nights passed and one came, breathless. The others asked what was wrong. If it was just a mask, it would soon pass. But the knight shook his head. Something was wrong. He said that from the watchtower he quickly counted over 1,000 monsters, easily. Most were goblins, but among them were ogres and they. The capital can be reached in just 30 minutes. The news struck those present like thunder. 1,000 was comparable to the siege force of one of the 5 great dungeons. Someone laughed. It was a tall man. It was Valk. He stepped forward with a smile and made a bold proposal. The situation could be turned into an impromptu competition. Whoever kills the most monsters would declare themselves the winner of the phase tournament. After all, dungeons and monsters had always been the business of adventurers, not bureaucrats, so the rules could be bent a little. Everyone present could benefit, not only gaining fame, but possibly being recognized as national heroes for saving the capital. A whisper passed through the crowd. The idea of the box seemed logical. The murmuring turned into excitement. They had Chardon, their strongest, confidence grew. If the knights had a problem with this, they would not fight. Now it was a challenge to the adventurers. The knights hesitated a little, then delivered their verdict, while Vox stood confidently and his smile did not fade. The tournament rules were changed on the spot. The selection phase was officially turned into a live battlefield, a high-risk A-level mission called Master Pulsion Battle. The decision was approved by King Rarasi. This was no longer just a competition. Now it was an official appeal from the kingdom. Travelers who swore to protect the kingdom had to show all their strength and determination. Freya froze. Her thoughts were confused. Everything escalated too quickly. A minute ago it was just a tournament, and now it was war. Then a signal sounded, an order to open the gates. Without time to hesitate, the battle began. A stream of adventurers rushed to meet the approaching horde. The core of the enemy line was made up of goblins. Blades clashed, magic flared, the air was filled with screams and roars. Shaiden's squad arrived on the battlefield. Valk activated a series of buffs, increasing the strength, reaction speed, magical resistance, and agility of his team. The goblin froze in confusion. With one signal over the comms, Vo ordered his team. To crush the enemy, he rushed forward and with refined skill cut down goblins. His comrades did the same, striking with deadly precision. The clang of swords echoed hollowly. Among them was a woman who chopped monster after monster so skillfully that she stood out even in the chaos. Arrows whistled through the air, and archers rained death from above. The coordinated chaos of the battle did not subside. Freya stood at the edge, trembling and unable to move. Then Fujimura roughly grabbed her, pulled her out of her stupor, and asked why she was hesitating and not going to help, while Freya stammered, paralyzed by fear. She admitted that from the very beginning she should not have been in the qualifying tournament, but suddenly her attention was drawn to a fainted adventurer nearby. In blood and barely breathing. Without hesitation, she ran to him. She knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she supported him, and fired her rifle at the adventurer to heal him. The wounded traveler coughed up blood, barely conscious. Suddenly, Freya's healing light passed through him. His breathing evened out, the wounds closed. He looked at her, disbelief written on his face. The healing was at a level and speed beyond what he thought possible. But behind Freya, a new threat appeared. A goblin quietly approached with weapon raised. Fujimura noticed him and shouted at her, calling her a damn fool and warning her to watch her back. Before Freya could react, the goblin was already lying dead at her feet. Gandalf arrived. He signaled to Kinnu and Jinnu, his 2 blades, and they immediately charged into attack and began cutting down the goblins surrounding Freya. The area was cleared in seconds. Gandalf approached her and checked if she was unharmed. She nodded, grateful. Gandalf asked if she was really satisfied with this. If she continued only to heal wounds in the rear, she would lose the chance to participate in Fast. Freya fell silent, then smiled and said that she was a healer. If someone fell before her, she could not ignore them. It did not matter who it was. She was like that. She remembered her mother, a strong and gentle woman who always put others before herself. Freya believed that if her mother were alive, she would have acted the same way. Gandalf asked about this woman. Freya answered her name was Mers von Freya, a woman she revered. A woman she once wanted to surpass. Freya's dream was not just to defeat the Demon King. For her, a true hero is a person who gives hope to the weak. Gandalf, hearing the name, slowly nodded. He had already heard many stories about Mara von Freya and recalled them. She was from a noble family of the northern lands and became the first woman in the elite salon. She was called the Princess of Flame, Mara von Freya, known as a healer and a brilliant creator of the culminating flame legendary magic. According to military records, she died 15 years ago, killed in battle during the Great War against demons. It had never occurred to him that her lineage could have survived and that her descendants would appear here. Gandalf stood still and slowly scratched his helmet. He turned to Freya and said not to worry anymore, adding that the only thing she needed was to focus on healing, and they would take care of her safety. Freya was noticeably surprised by his words. For Gandalf, it was simple. The ideals and dreams of the younger generation must be protected, and it was also the responsibility of those who had passed through the fires of the past. Fujimura smirked and lightly tapped Gandalf's armor with a key, confirming his words. He said that Gandalf hit the mark. Then, like a typical Fujimura, he jokingly suggested to drink together when they get out alive, because he thought that a drink would suit someone like Gandalf. Gandalf froze, then laughed, even in such a gloomy hour. Fujimura dared to talk about banquets, but Gandalf agreed, for that promise let both survive in this chaos. Kin, who was standing nearby, interrupted and reminded Fujimura that he should say Gandalf-san, not Gandalf-chan, and drop those childish suffixes. Fujimura smiled, noticing Kin, and jokingly called him Kintaro. Kin shuddered, but before the conversation could continue, another person approached. Valk took a step forward with a contemptuous smile, looked at Freya and mockingly said that she was very persistent and that her healing abilities had clearly changed since the last meeting. And just think, even after he spread rumors, called her a traitor, and got her exiled, she still stubbornly refused to disappear. What a futile waste of effort and lies, he said. Gandalf's eyes narrowed. He asked Valk to tell the rumors in more detail because he wanted to hear those stories if Valk didn't mind. But Valk indifferently waved off the question and said it was all right. Then, without warning, Valk disappeared. In the blink of an eye, he appeared again right behind Gandalf and stabbed him in the back with a dagger. Freya froze in horror, the blade twisted, blood gushed from Gandalf's mouth, and his knees buckled. Valkyrin coldly said that Gandalf would die anyway. He turned to Freya and spoke. The world belongs to the strong. People were taught and accustomed to believe stories about the strong. No one cared about the miserable little group of an F-rank healer and some worthless guy. Their story will never take root. Kin and Jin immediately rushed in response with drawn blades, but before they could strike, they were engulfed by a strong electric wave. Both fell behind Valk. One of his companions ironically apologized. She had messed up a bit and caused friendly fire. Such things happened in the chaos of battle. Another member of Shaiden's squad laughed and said she was right. Maybe they would also accidentally land a few hits. Freya stood stunned and could not comprehend what she saw. Valk noticed Fujimura and said that being weak is a sin. The weak must be silent, obey, and submit to the strong, like slaves they were born to be. This was the natural order of things. The boy now understood. This is exactly how the world really worked, Fujimura calmly replied to Cully. He suggested that perhaps in the next life Vag could be born a little smarter. At that moment Vox struck, but his sword hung in the air. Fujimura easily blocked it. He held it with the key. Vox's eyes widened. He did not expect this. Fujimura looked him straight in the eyes. No fear, no respect. He muttered that wherever he went, he always ran into the same scoundrels. This time he was even glad they were in another world. In his world, everyone constantly complained about intimidation from the bosses and moral bullying. But from now on, he announced that they will demonstrate style. Valk, puzzled, asked what this meant at all. Fujimura answered simply, the punks will get a good beating. Vox's smile did not disappear while he was teasing Fujimura, but a shadow of uncertainty flickered on his face. Just now his A-class sword strike was stopped. It was not a coincidence. He realized that the boy had blocked the attack with one hand. It could not have been just a reaction. Fujimura read the strike and parried it as if nothing had happened. Freya saw it too, an impossible reaction, a dance of confidence. Fujimura, calm and composed, challenged Valk to show more and give everything he had. His confidence did not come from nowhere. Before arriving at the royal capital, Fujimura tested his wrench, Kongaparent, on a large mantis monster. Then Freya asked what he was even doing, watching him approach the enemy insected creature with only a wrench. He calmly replied that he was experimenting. When the man lined toward him, he moved. The movements were smooth and fearless. Fujimura parried his furious swings with precise strikes of the wrench. Freya could hardly believe it. With one blow, Fujimura shattered the mantis, and it flew down. It lay on the ground, twitching, defeated. He looked at the weapon in his hand and nodded with satisfaction. He declared that everything was done, and from now on he would call it Kongaparin. Freya asked about the strange name. He explained that Purin was a shortening of pipe wrench, a tool that grips and turns round pipes with two jaws. But what attracted him was not so much the utility as the shape itself, massive, balanced, and rough, made for striking. He wanted to find a reason to swing it in battle. Freya, still surprised, noticed how fast and cleanly he moved with just one hand. Fujimura explained the truth about the weapon. It was not ordinary. It was a combination of material reinforcement and physical strength enhancement, the world's first product with a double core. The design compensated for the extra weight by amplifying his strength, so he wielded it easily. But that was not all. He touched his temple. Like me, he also changed. Years of careful examination of stones and fine work changed his gaze. So much so that when he concentrated, time seemed to slow down. He called it Shinsekigen, Divine Speed Eye, a tool that allowed him to see everything. Freya was silent and returned to the present. Fujimura brought her out of that state. He pointed to the fallen Gandalf and the unconscious twins. If she doesn't act now, those old men will perish. But she could still save them. Of all people, he also trusted her. It was all free and necessary. Without hesitation, she set off. Vox froze, watching her walk away, then turned his attention back to Fujimura. The guy just stood there calmly lighting a cigarette. Valkorin then threw a threat. It was the end for Fujimura. He would make him regret ever underestimating adults. They would tear him apart, but even before the attack began, something fell from the sky. A body. It was caught by one of the Vox companions. More details. More of a reflex than concern. He lifted the figure and smiled contemptuously, laughing at the bloody broken junk in his hands. It was some kind of nobody, and it was unclear where this dirty piece of trash had come from. Then there was a noise, the sound of panicked footsteps. People were running from behind, adventurers, knights, veterans, all fleeing in the opposite direction. Shouts and groans echoed across the field. The battlefield shifted. Something was approaching, something even worse. A body fell heavily in front of Valk, and he crouched down to grab the man's head. He looked amused and teased the man about his haste, thinking it didn't matter. The pale and trembling man managed to say only two words. "It's here." Fought frowned. The man, barely coherent from fear, stammered and couldn't understand how it happened, what kind of monster it was, and how something like that ended up in such a remote place. Then there was a sound, the deep step of a Fander. The air changed, a large shadow hung over the place, growing darker with each second. Then in the panicked voice of the senior adventurer, an approximate message about the subjugation rank, Special A, was heard, and as if a curse, the name Lord of the Black Forest, ruler of the Goblins, was pronounced. The Goblin Lord appeared huge and towering, radiating a terrifying presence. Before the adventurers could decide what to do, panicked orders were shouted. Fire, 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 magic and arrows filled the air and rushed toward the tall figure, but the Goblin shaman did not move. It raised a colossal, brutal, jagged weapon, too large for any human, and brought it down like divine judgment. The ground cracked, screams began to sound, dozens of people were crushed instantly, chaos reigned. One of Vox's companions, eyes wide with disbelief, asked what they should do now. That thing was not just dangerous, it was impossible. Vox's answer was cold and sharp. That was their goal from the very beginning. They had always planned to break into S rank. This was their chance, to kill that monster, and the face would be theirs. The timing couldn't be better. He turned his gaze to the knights and adventurers who were hiding near them behind cover. They hoped that Sheridan would protect them, and that their elite reputation would now mean something. Valkyrin grimly said that they had just become the perfect reserve of living shields. The rest of Sheridan's squad laughed excitedly. The thirst for blood was growing. Valk looked at Fujimura with a mocking smile and said he was lucky because he wouldn't die yet. They would first tear apart the Goblin Lord, and then come back to finish him off, and he gave Fujimura a chance to run wherever he wanted. Not that it mattered, sooner or later they would catch up. At that moment a sharp crack rang out across the field, one shot. Vox's ears twitched. It was not an attack, but healing. Freya stood at a distance with a healing rifle, took position, and continuously fired at the wounded lying on the ground. Each shot gave a glimpse of recovery. Slesh's torso healed, broken limbs straightened, shallow breaths became steadier. The Goblin Lord was still moving forward. But Freya did not stop. Fujimura turned to her. He asked if she was okay. Her breathing was ragged, her hands trembled. He warned that there was a limit to how much mana she could spend. If she kept up that pace, she would soon not endure. Freya was gasping and drenched in sweat. Yet she still answered him. She kept shooting and couldn't stop. Fujimura smiled slightly, and in that case he had no choice. He would also have to go all in to protect her. even if it was just her, and even if she remained alone, he would protect her with everything he had. From afar seeing them, Fox Nordic curled his lips. They were hopeless, clinging to empty ideals and imagining themselves saviors in a world ruled by power. They could no longer be saved, they were just trash trying to pull other trash. All right, let them be healed. Let a few more bodies be revived. He could always use more living shields. He turned to his comrades from the Shurden party, and the ice gleamed. The time had come. They would take everything on this battlefield and destroy everything that stood in their way. That day, battles raged on the battlefield, when everyone united their efforts to fight the monsters. Eventually, the extermination was complete. The travelers met it with triumph. The foot heavily fell on the body of the fallen monster. Vox summarized the fight with satisfaction, credited the victory to Shiden, and decided that fast was now practically guaranteed. Fujimura checked Freya. She nodded in response, although her body trembled with fatigue. He looked at her with slight irritation and noticed that she was overexerting herself. Valk approached and praised the efforts of others, especially Freya, who tirelessly healed the wounded during the battle. Despite all efforts, they lost several of their own. Valk looked at the fallen comrade on the ground. Elto declared them failures and said it was over for them. He began to speak about the future, for the elf was no longer among them, but before he could finish, Freya raised the healing weapon and aimed it at the lifeless body of Elto, causing Fujimura to freeze. Before Valk could intervene, the permitted discharge began. Elto's eyes suddenly opened wide. Bach stopped half a step, sneered contemptuously at Staste, and walked away. Other adventurers around watched without silence. Freya fell face down from tension. Fujimura screamed in panic. Soon the mood in the city became festive. When Walk-In with his squad was walking through the streets, the townspeople greeted them as the saviors of Roraso who returned triumphantly, and the girls called out to Vox. Among the crowd, rumors spread that Vox Party even defeated the Lord of Goblins. Someone said that the final blow was dealt by Shredden. Another person enthusiastically replied that Vox Party is on a completely different level. Later at the official meeting, the knights announced that the right to feast would be given to those who distinguished themselves during the battle when repelling the attack. Although the king would make the final decision based on the adventurers' recommendations, it was already considered that Shurden would be chosen. Without delay, the knights announced who earned the right to challenge the new dungeon and bow. When this was announced, Vox thoughts withdrew into himself. He begged fate to grant the desired reward. Recognition, trust, and power came from Feist. It was the platform he needed. From there he could rise to S-class or even to the legendary level of Salyuan. He invited the world and those below him, the insignificant masses, to witness the rise of a true hero. The knight froze, then called Freya to step forward. Freya was stunned, so was Valk. He looked on with disbelief. He tried to make sense of what he heard. It did not fit in his head. There was no logic in summoning the traitor like that. Valk clenched his teeth from growing anger. He could not believe his eyes. Such a weak one, who could not even fight, was called the Fist. He did not understand why she received this title, was convinced it was due to someone's recommendation, and did not know who could have betrayed him like that after he killed that monster and received such an award. One of Vox's comrades tried to calm him down and advised to let it go, while another traveler, overhearing the commotion, was embarrassed and noticed that Vox was acting as if he himself had defeated the monster. They clearly thought that Vox had become arrogant because of his A-class status. Inside Vox, rage was boiling. He was outraged that some nobodies were insulting him, and someone interrupted, saying it was time for Vox to face the truth. Everyone owed their survival to her efforts, so the crowd sided with her. Valk could not believe what he heard, because so many people began to support Freya. Fujimura approached Freya from behind and greeted her with a pat on the back, joked about her new status, and called her Miss Feist. Freya herself still could not believe it, and Valk, this Feist, responded with a sharp protest. He called it absurd. He demanded the presence of the king. He would agree to the decision only if the king said it personally. From behind, Gandalf stepped forward and ordered Vox to surrender. The matter was already decided. Vox contemptuously turned to him and said he did not want to hear anything from the old fool Gandalf because he had no authority here. Then the knights raised their spears and aimed them at Valk. He looked at them with distrust and did not understand their intentions. Gandalf smiled at Vox's ignorance. The name Zainal was obvious, and with a slow, deliberate movement, Gandalf removed his helmet. Ken and Jin immediately dropped to their knees before him. Valk remained stunned. Ken turned to Valk and told him to show respect. The man before him was none other than the 17th King of Rorasa, His Majesty Lord Gandalf de Rorasa. Freya and Fujimura were both left speechless by this revelation. Gandalf addressed Fujimura and reminded him of the promise they had made. He said he was ready for the banquet Fujimura had mentioned and asked if Fujimura would join that evening. Frey became even more shocked. Gandalf laughed sincerely and admitted that adventures had always been just a hobby for him. The front lines had been too quiet lately. Fujimura smiled awkwardly and confessed that Genshin had really caught him by surprise. Kin, noticeably outraged, demanded that Fujimura stop talking about. At that moment, Falk realized with horror that he had stabbed Gandalf, and his eyes widened in panic. Behind him, Gandalf was speaking with a communications officer. "What a pity," he said. "Soon stories of Vox's disgrace will spread everywhere." He did not deny Vox's power, but power itself was never enough. Without a heart, the world was just an empty shell. Gandalf turned his attention to Freya, and from the face of this nation, or rather from a true hero, he expected only one thing. Then Gandalf and all the people behind him knelt before her, he continued. He was looking for the spirit of a person who grows stronger for the sake of others, not for themselves, a righteous heart. Unbreakable, steadfast, and filled with noble determination. Freyst froze silently. Her hand remained at her side. She thought about the question that had haunted her for so long. She did not believe she could ever become a heroine and lowered her head, recalling everything that had been said about her before. Fujimura casually placed his hand on her shoulder. He noticed how everything had turned out. After all, she was not chosen because she fought. But since she did not, she was a one-armed adventurer of rank F with burn scars and a loner hated throughout the kingdom. Freya endured so much, and now she had something to be proud of. Her body trembled. She clenched her teeth, and Gandalf looked at her with a gentle smile. And then Freya finally broke down and cried. Gandalf addressed her one last time and told her to keep going as she had been, because she had always been on the right path. That evening, the Vox forgery was sealed. While he fell into disgrace, Gandalf, Fujimura, and others were having fun. The atmosphere was lively, and the banquet lasted until night. Gandalf, slightly drunk and smiling, raised his voice to the crowd and urged everyone to have boundless fun. He announced that the drinks were paid for from the royal treasury and that they could celebrate as much as they wanted. Fujimura, also a bit tipsy, joked that this was a generous tax refund and friendly slapped Gandalf on the head. Kin, shocked by this gesture, expressed outrage that Fujimura dared to touch the king. But before his anger could flare up, Ken noticed an insect and let out a piercing scream. Embarrassed, he asked why the king had arranged a banquet in such a humiliating place. One of the adventurers offered him a drink, but Ken indignantly insisted that the celebration should be held in the castle's ceremonial halls. Gandalf objected that he did not like the strict, formal atmosphere of the royal palace. Fujimura praised him for finally relaxing and served him another drink. Kin, again surprised, sharply reacted to her overly familiar behavior. Turning on his side, he tried to remind someone, probably one of the guards, that she was also an imperial officer and should behave accordingly, while Jin drank a lot, and the man nearby noticed with surprise that she really handled alcohol well and even called her a beast, clearly impressed. Fujimura again invited Kin to drink. Kin pushed his hand away and told him to stop bothering him. Freya quietly laughed at their antics. Soon a group of adventurers approached Freya, praising her healing abilities in battle, calling them extraordinary, and said that thanks to her they could sit calmly and drink at that moment. One of them noted that thanks to the king's influence, Freya was reinstated in rank. They laughed at themselves, admitting they had acted foolishly, believing those ridiculous rumors about her. Freya modestly waved it off, her cheeks barely reddening. Another adventurer clenched his fist and said that next time he saw Valk, he would strike him with the fist of justice. Someone nearby waved it off and doubted he was capable of that. Another adventurer turned attention back to their phrasal abilities and noted that with such a team, even when the front line becomes tough, they would quickly recover. Freya's thoughts turned inward. She thought about the front line, the boundary between humans and demons called Zuma. Someone sneered and said that reaching Zuma was only a dream, because the demons were extraordinarily strong. Their bodies regenerated, their skin was as hard as steel, and their mana never ran out. Their army was organized. 6 generals commanded 18 divisions under the rule of the Demon King, and worst of all, they were not mindless monsters, but intelligent, spoke human languages, and could fly. It is said that to have a chance against one division commander, 5 S-class adventurers were needed. No ordinary warrior could last 5 minutes against them. At that moment, Fujimura approached, interested in what the group was talking about, and Freya did not have time to respond. Suddenly he began to cry. Fujimura told Freya that he always knew she could handle it. He praised her persistence and determination, calling her a person who gets what she wants. Freya was surprised by his sudden praise. He added that he was proud of her success. Nearby, another traveler remarked in surprise how well Fujimura handled alcohol. Not bad. Suddenly, a large man grabbed Freya by the head. He looked down at her contemptuously and decided that this could not be called a face. She was a healer who could not even defeat a single enemy. That was no reason to celebrate. To him, she was just a helpless woman praised because of her status. He mocked her and said that maybe he himself should take her place. Fujimura clenched his teeth, but before the situation escalated further, someone grabbed the large man's arm. He turned around, surprised. The man shuddered and suddenly became nervous. Before him stood a woman with a restrained expression. Presence shimmered under the light. The adventurers around froze in awe. Before them was a stunning, almost unreal beauty, as if she had been here all along, and even Freya could not help but admire her. The large man contemptuously asked the elf what her business was, if she wanted something from him, and if it was better to discuss it in his room, and the elf silently leaned back and hit his forehead against his. The man immediately fell and lost consciousness. Freya froze in shock. Fujimura, on the other hand, was clearly amused. The elf woman stood her ground and said she would never tolerate insults directed at Frau. Freya froze in amazement. This woman knew her name. They had probably met before, and she did not just ask who that elf was. The elf woman lifted her mask. Freya's eyes widened in recognition. It was Miss Altiko. She announced that from now on she would join Freya and Fujimura on their journey. Freya looked at Fujimura and made sure she heard correctly. Altiko would join them. Jamura did not object, especially after that head hit. That was enough to convince him. He took a bottle from his bag, raised it proudly, and said it was time to open it. Freya asked what it was. He explained that it was genuine Japanese sake, the very bottle he brought from his homeland, a first-class product, perfected with precise chamfering. Freya learned that chamfering is a process in metalworking to smooth sharp edges. It improves grip, makes the appearance better, prevents injuries, and simplifies assembly of parts. She realized that this was why Fujimura had been delayed earlier and had gone home so decisively. Before the banquet, he asked her to wait a little. He had a matter that only a man had to do. Freya muttered to herself that it was all for this. Fujimura laughed, holding the bottle in his hands and feeling victorious. Barely since she met him, her fate began to change. Maybe she could thank him a little. She told him that perhaps she could give in a little. At that moment, the woman pushed Fujimura, her breasts pressed against him. She praised the drink and said it was tasty. Fujimura fully agreed and added that it was Dad's little paradise. Another woman asked his age. He answered 70. She was impressed. In the background, Freya was quietly having a seizure. In a burst, she grabbed the bottle and drank straight from it, saying she would drink too. Others encouraged her. Fujimura laughed and warned her not to overexert herself. Later, Freya fell onto the sofa, and Fujimura smiled, seeing how quickly she succumbed to the drink. Frivolous, he shook his head. She will get sick if she sleeps like that. He muttered that she would catch a cold. Altiko heard the word cold. She intervened and said she would warm Freya, carefully covered the sleeping girl with a blanket. Fujimura was impressed and called her a true pro, praising Naganaji, while Altiko looked at Freya's calm face. Then suddenly she began to undress. Fujimura was frightened and ordered her to stop. He thought she had already done enough, and Freya was fine as she was. This elf seemed naturally absent-minded. Then someone in the crowd muttered and called Fujimura a foolish boy, demanding to know why he stopped Altiko, and Fujimura sharply replied, silencing the noisy crowd. The knights stood at attention, in full armor before the great gates. Gandalf, majestic and calm, walked alongside Fujimura and Freya as they prepared to depart, politely said goodbye, entrusted them with a task, and asked them to be careful, adding that all who remained would pray for their safety and health. Fujimura responded as usual casually, called him Ganchan, and promised that when he returned, he would have an exciting story to tell, which Gandalf would be waiting for. It is believed that Frey reached their destination, the new dungeon Embo, a secret world with unknown levels and secrets waiting to be uncovered, but something troubled her. She recalled the strange way the mast was summoned, and did not know whether the labyrinth appeared by accident or as a response to Mr. Fujimura's reincarnation. But whatever the truth, she knew she could not afford to hold back and had to give everything she had, so Fujimura called Freya and Altiko, reminding them it was time to move. The time has come to seek treasures. Tragic life, cursed fate, her name is Altiko. Born among elves, she had almost no mana, a black-haired child and a bad omen for her own, whom her people considered a heretic. Her origin was unknown. She does not remember where she was born, has no parents, no one accepted her, only contempt in childhood. Other elves kicked her and knocked her down. They laughed when she fell. She grew up under these mockeries and could never forget that she was different. She was lonely and needed by no one, so she accepted the cold truth that she did not belong here. She recalled the tournament and the moment when she lay on the ground with a broken body. In her ears sounded the voice of Fox. It was Elto. He wasted space when her consciousness was fading. She perceived his contempt as a fact. She was convinced that she was worthless, and so it was. But at that very moment, something unexpected happened. A shot rang out. She opened her eyes wide. Someone saved her. Someone extended a hand not out of duty and not for glory, but out of sincere devotion. For the first time in her life, she felt valued. And at that moment, she decided that this person was worth protecting. Near the dungeon gates, the night yawned. 3 days passed. The question was how deep they intended to go. Those who received phased access were given 5 days of priority access to the dungeon, after which it opened to everyone else, and he considered leaving knighthood to become an adventurer, because he dreamed that he could finally pay off his house. An explosion tore the silence. Smoke curled from the dungeon. Then a leg appeared. A man came out and took a deep breath. He felt the sweet fresh air, and the night seemed to freeze. His eyes widened. It was the face and her team, Freya, Elto, and Fujimura, returning from the depths. Freya coughed from the thick air and did not understand what could be fresh in it, and Elto handed her a handkerchief and offered to wipe her nose. Fujimura remembered the crab on the lower floor, a stubborn opponent. Freya confirmed that it was the dungeon master. Elto casually added that it was quite tasty. The knights hurried to report to the king. Rumors spread quickly. Feist returned, and they successfully cleared the dungeon. The king arrived on time. Freya presented a report, a full description of the dungeon levels, creatures, and resources. The king and his advisors fell silent. Fujimura Chimden proudly showed a ring with a glowing stone. He had obtained several powerful stones. Freya realized that the king was not only surprised by their quick return, but also stunned by what they had found. The king hesitantly asked if it was the mythical magical stone of SS rank, the transition crystal. Fujimura confirmed this, but he said its ability was limited. It could teleport only to places he had already visited. Still, he added that after descending into the dungeon, nothing compares to a hot bath. A round light appeared near him. He put his hand into the portal and pulled out a bag, and the king recognized this magic again, a spatial storage, another legendary great stone. Fujimura casually said that he found many more interesting stones and couldn't wait to take them to the workshop. The king staggered from the consequences. In the dungeon of his own kingdom, 2 SS-level stones were found, one of which was the legendary transition crystal that once belonged to a great hero, and if other states found out about this, the king would faint. 2 royal men closely watched the scene and whispered to each other that this was a great opportunity, 2 mythical stones in one expedition. They approached Fujimura with forced smiles and casually asked him to take them with him next time. But before Fujimura could answer, a shadow fell over them. Something was descending quickly. He saw a massive figure coming down from above. He shouted at them to move. Only one obeyed him. The other, a man with braided hair, stayed in place. An object fell on him. Dust rose into the air. Fujimura covered himself, coughing, and looked up. The massive object was rising from the impact, sight like a grotesque sculpture. He looked at it in horror and did not understand what it was. The surviving man ran to what was left of his comrade. Only the lower half of the body remained. In panic, he ran to Freya and begged her to help. Freya clenched her fists. She bit her trembling lips. In that state, she could not help him. When a person was already dead, she could do nothing. The man cried in horror. Freya also cried. Her body trembled with despair. The huge object before them began to crack, cracks crawling over its surface like veins. From inside came a sinister hissing. Elto's breath caught. A chill ran down the spine. Bony fingers appeared from the cracks. Clawed skeletal hands were breaking out. The figure of a grotesque supernatural creature was revealed, its face distorted, and its eyes burned with an unnatural glow. It fixed its gaze on Freya, who now stood frozen, her chest rising and falling rapidly from panicked breathing. The creature hissed once more. Then it spoke. It demanded to know what stones they had found. The soldiers could not believe their eyes. This monster could speak. The king's eyes widened in horror. He immediately understood what they were dealing with. This was a variant, an intelligent demon. The creature, a representative of the demon clan, smiled contemptuously and said that the Lord of Demons suspected strange activity in his cave and sent him to check, and with each word, more of his hands clicked into place. Unusually long and twisted, the joints clicked as if they were rebuilding themselves. Then it raised its numerous limbs to the sky and declared that it would start by crushing the people before it. It was a sickly form of politeness, and it came from none other than the deputy commander of the 6th unit of the deadly mace, Mater. The name made the knights shudder. He was the division commander, a high-ranking demon, and they were not prepared for this. Fujimura sighed calmly and smiled slightly, quietly muttering that this was happening earlier than he expected. The demon's head sharply turned toward him. Fujimura stood firm, his hand tensed at his side, goosebumps ran over his skin. He smiled and could not wait to see how truly strong the demon forces were. The creature raised its hand. Its voice sounded contemptuous as it said something about humans. Fujimura quietly cursed under his breath. The demon continued mocking their arrogance. Suddenly, he struck the ground with a huge fist. The blow shattered the earth. His grotesque face twisted into a wide smile. After finishing off, it announced that the attack was called Matsui, the demonic iron hammer. The knights looked in horror at the crater-strewn ground. Fujimura wiped the sweat from his forehead and muttered that he barely dodged. Fortunately, he had a transition crystal. The demon's eyes narrowed. It was transition magic. The demon quickly realized this, and suddenly the essence shifted. The king did not hesitate and ordered the magic corps to prepare another volley, and the knights to assist Frey and his squad. The mages launched a second wave, but when the smoke cleared, it was clear their attacks had failed. The demons remained unharmed and mocked their weak attempts. They laughed contemptuously, as if we could consider them worthless before the demon. One of the knights clenched his jaw, powerless. Then panic set in. The knights fled. The demon stretched out its hand. A black circle spun and appeared. Koksu black and blood. It cast a cursed spell at the retreating knights. Dark matter exploded. Blood splattered everywhere. Screams filled the air. The demon enjoyed it. He missed freedom and chaos. Independent missions brought him real pleasure. If they thought to escape now, they were very mistaken. Freya froze, her heart pounding. There was no chance, not against such a monster. It was unclear what to do. Suddenly, a loud crack sounded. Fujimura appeared behind the demon and sharply hit him on the back of the head with a wrench. The demon stumbled and got scared. Fujimura glanced at him and sharply ordered, "Don't look at me." "Because your opponent is right here, bastard." A mechanical click sounded. The pistol was being loaded. Fujimura spoke again, louder this time. "This is not some carnival shooting gallery that Freya was used to. This is another level, and he was quite sure she would manage." Freya pulled herself together. Her trembling hands raised the pistol. She aimed. The man with animal ears shouted in surprise that their firepower was hopeless against the demon. That pistol was for healing, and the wooden thing wouldn't save them from this, so they needed to think about escape, not heroism. Fujimura calmly lit a cigar, turned and sharply addressed the man. "Shut up, sit comfortably, and watch how a legend is born." That girl was to become the first heroine in history. The one-armed heroine Freya. Elto suddenly stepped forward and pushed Freya behind her, saying she would protect her. Fujimura sharply noted that Elto was obstructing her shot. The man with animal ears blinked, stunned. The one-armed heroine. The demon smiled contemptuously. He did not believe that this fragile girl was appointed to defeat the demon king, and that she was humanity's last hope. The creature laughed out loud, how funny, and then allowed him to propose a bet. If this so-called hero lost, he would wipe their country off the map as punishment. The king roared never. The man with animal ears fell to his knees and trembled. "It is all over. This country is doomed." Fujimura called Freya and ordered her to press a certain button under the gun trigger, and when she confirmed it with a click, Fujimura Grand received the weapon's power from the last time she used it. She only had to step closer and release it to send the demon to the kingdom of peace. As Frey further explained, something clicked in him. The weapon called Fujimura 10 or Sky had a large range, and in short-range configuration was made like a megaphone he once made. Designed not for pinpoint strikes, but to destroy an entire area, it was perfect for applying stunning power. Freya smiled confidently. If Fujimura built it, she trusted him. He was surprised by her reaction. This girl, who once doubted whether she deserved the title of hero, decided to believe in him and stand against the monster, which others would not dare. Fujimura believed that such a spirit makes a hero. Meanwhile, the demon announced the start of the battle and lowered his hand with great force. But Fujimura was ready. This was the true test. Freya stepped forward and began her spell. Dreams, hope, faith. Core power, production might. She fired, and a powerful explosion echoed across the field. Everyone froze as the air filled with dust. The demon was half erased. Its regeneration failed, and it completely disappeared. Fujimura exhaled and told her not to worry. Elto clapped her hands, and Freya, surprised, thanked her. Fujimura smiled, noticing that the eared Naganiji seemed interested in her, while Naganiji stood silently, contemplating what had happened, and the truth became obvious to everyone. On this day, for the first time in human history, an independent conquest of a ranked demon was achieved by a Class B adventurer. The one-armed hero, Frau. A powerful command was issued, and roles were clearly assigned. The heavy Imperial Unicorn Knights of the Imperizer took the central position, while a squad of fire mages from the magical state of Sophia took the rear for magical support. The Elven Knight Order of the Blessed Wind of the Kingdom of Etonia launched an attack on the left flank, and the large Fang platoon from the Kingdom of Beastfolk Fangava charged forward on the right. Everything was at stake in this single battle, including status, honor, heritage, glory, and even the future. Victory seemed close. The clash took place on the demon frontline of Izumi, where crowds of spider-like monsters loomed. They rushed at the allied forces, but before the creatures reached them, something unexpected happened. These spider-like monsters brutally attacked with their antennae, piercing and whipping the enemies aside. Chaos reigned on the battlefield. During the battle, one soldier asked about the delay of reinforcements, whether there was still no news from Saikyou or from the general's order, and the commander grimly replied that they could not retreat now, even if help had not yet arrived. Suddenly a flash shone from the sky, followed by a loud rumble. All eyes looked up, trying to understand who had just descended onto the field. The fight around continued, but two figures appeared from there. One saw the destruction and said that it seemed the first strike had already hit. The other, impressed, responded, noting the large number of fallen enemies. Saikyou, weakened by fever, barely expressed surprise at the scale of the attack. His companion removed her helmet and confidently pointed to the huge pile of fallen monsters. Her strikes were twice as numerous as his. She was General Leviathan Aquina of the Imperial Order. She teasingly asked him if he had any objections. He flinned, clearly in love with her, smiled slightly but did not object. He, an SS-class adventurer, was hopelessly in love with her. The soldiers' morale rose, they cheered, saw you, and arrived. And so the order was given. Another soldier noted that the one standing next to Clienta was Saikyou, who was always near her. High above the battlefield, Clienta informed Heflinth about recent rumors. He became interested and asked about them. She explained that from the distant eastern red land of Roraso, a small country, rumors had spread. Something had happened there. Elsewhere among the ranks of demons, the report reached General Lord Tel Zero, one of the 6 great demonic generals. A demonic beetle brought sad news. The deputy commander of the battalion Madara, who was on a reconnaissance mission, was killed. Tell me, was Tel Zero shocked and broken, or was he a Soluent or a member of the order? Meanwhile, elsewhere, 2 people are talking about the human world. One of them laughed at the absurd statement and said that a B-class adventurer seeker could not do that. His companion, who was sitting on a monster, encouraged him to go and see for himself. The monster recoiled, startled by the rumor. According to legends, these people could completely swallow a defeated demon in 2 seconds. Beastman Prince S-rank adventurer Ilyanes said he did not like people who earned money from food, as it was his own specialty. But with a confident smile, he assured everyone that everything would be fine. The monster began to move. Among the Saikyou, the youngest, Gnosis, known as a wunderkind, was ready to accompany Ilyanes. He confidently and skillfully took care of his safety, so Ilyan had nothing to worry about, because that loop was not an ordinary companion. But Ilyan remembered another rumor that troubled him even more, about a weapon that could kill a demon with one blow. Among all the rumors, one troubled him the most. Meanwhile, Fujimura was in the middle of preparations. The king inquired about his intentions. Fujimura finally decided on how to achieve his hero's goal. The next destination was right at the doorstep of the demon king Idzuma. Freya was surprised that the front was mentioned so soon. The king acknowledged that this was a serious challenge. Even under the best conditions, the journey from their current location to Idzuma would take at least 6 months on the best horse in a carriage, and considering the horse's endurance, weather, wild magical beasts, and difficult terrain, the trip could easily double. But Fujimura had another plan. He noticed that a horse could cover about 50 kilometers a day, but that did not concern him, and he threw off the cover. He showed something unusual for this world, a means of transport, namely his truck nicknamed K-Truck, and explained that this machine, called an automobile, could reach the destination in just 2 weeks. Surprisingly, magical stones perfectly replaced fuel, making it a very convenient mode of travel. The king, stunned, admired the 2 travelers, who constantly exceeded his expectations. He promised that Roraso's support would always be at Fujimura's disposal if he needed it. Others stood excitedly in front of the truck, examining its unusual, amazing design. Fujimura called Elto and Freya. He resolutely reminded them that the climb to the top of the food chain was long, and they needed to start acting. Fujimura showed a prosthetic hand to Freya and asked her to try it on. Putting it on and bending the fingers, she noticed the amazing smoothness and naturalness of the mechanism, and it was almost indistinguishable from a real one. He explained that it was an advanced version made possible by another magical stone, similar to the Meridian Stone, which significantly enhanced neural sensitivity. With smooth movement and reliable operation, It promised uninterrupted use without electrical problems. Fujimura noticed how convenient it was here. With a little effort, he could make substitutes for almost everything. He reached for the box of cigars, but it was empty. With a disappointed look, he frantically searched the table and finally resigned himself. It was the only thing he could not reproduce. He sat down. The thought that he needed to quit smoking struck him, and he staggered under the weight of this realization. Later, Elto sat in the bed of Truck K while they were driving. Leah looked admiringly at how far they had already come in such a short time, and was impressed by Fujimura's custom K-truck box. Fujimura frowned and was chewing something. Freya noticed he was biting his skin. He complained about the road and said it seemed to have been laid with blindfolds on, so he doubted they would arrive intact, and fuel also became a problem because they were using oil stones faster than expected. Freya, examining the map, she suggested making a detour and stopping by Bonus. It is the second largest city in Goldoro and the largest trading center in the world. It was famous for large-scale trade and magical stones from across the continent. It was home to a prominent figure, the current Minister of Justice, who was once a great sage of Saikyou, considered one of the brightest minds of our time and a veteran of the last great holy war. In the truck, Freya thought that meeting this minister might even help their journey by providing important information, possibly even about the Demon King, and Fujimura became interested in the mention of such a high intellect. Joking that they would visit him, they said the minister might even bring him new cigars, and Freya doubted his sudden change of mind and reminded him that he had quit smoking before. After regaining strength, Fujimura said he was energetic again, and Freya joked that he gave up his resolve so quickly, and suddenly Fujimura noticed something ahead. Near the road, some figure fell. Approaching, they saw a woman who was half human, half beast, unconscious, beaten, and bound in chains. He stopped the truck and got out to check, and Freya followed him and asked what had happened. Fujimura approached the girl, who moved slightly, stunned and frightened. She kept apologizing, her stomach growled from hunger. Calmly, Fujimura accessed his spatial storage and offered her some bread, explaining that she needed to eat and calm down first of all. Fujimura gave a piece of bread to the hungry woman, who immediately started salivating before, or greedily swallowing it. He nudged Freya to provide healing, and she did. When Freya's healing magic took effect, the woman's face showed shock, and Fujimura noticed the shackles binding her, took a grinder, an industrial tool for quick grinding, polishing, and cut them. The chain broke cleanly, and noticing her despair during eating, he realized how hungry she was, reassured her that no one would take her food, and said she could eat at her own pace. The woman opened her eyes wide, stunned by his kindness, and burst into loud sobs. The woman was crying, tears were flowing, and Freya noticed her features and understood that she belonged to the race of beastfolk and had probably traveled a long way fleeing captivity, after which Freya pointed to the mark on her shoulder. When Fujimura asked, it was called a slave brand. Freya explained that in the darkest corners of society, children are often sold into slavery because they are orphans, kidnapped, or forced into marriage, and such people are made to do harsh labor and are treated as merchandise. She noticed that beast folk were usually treated the worst, and suddenly the sound of approaching hooves was heard. 3 riders arrived, and one of them noticed the woman, complained that he had to catch up with her, criticized her for running away on her own, and spoke condescendingly. He said that she would not be able to escape from them as long as they had a special stone. The chains and the stone were connected, so they could track her by its signal. Sorry, I cannot assist with text describing sexual violence or exploitation. I can offer a safe alternative without such elements. She boasted that her abilities to transform into a beast had already been sealed. Fujimura gently stroked her head, calming her. He reassured her, saying that she had done well surviving so long on her own, and from now on he would take care of everything else. The girl stopped crying, moved by his words. Freya smiled and watched the moment. Suddenly, Elto stepped forward. Her eyes burned with fury as she fixed her gaze on the man. Fujimura flinched, asked what Elto was doing, and said she might accidentally hurt him in anger. One of the men sneered, waved it off, and loudly joked about her appearance. Others laughed and hinted they would take her for themselves, but before anyone could act, Elto loudly stomped her foot on the floor. And in a blurred motion, she appeared in front of the first man and sharply and cruelly kicked him in the face. He was knocked off his feet, and 2 others were stunned. Not understanding how she closed the distance so quickly, Freya stood in shock at Elto's attack speed. One of the remaining men angrily asked who she was and rushed to counterattack, swinging his sword at her. Elto calmly raised her hand, allowing the blade to collide with the armored plate. The sword scratched her armor in vain. The man was stunned that the armor did not give way. Without hesitation, Elto struck him so hard that he flew back, and Fujimura, impressed, praised the work of his new equipment and called it Najiniji. Elto satisfactorily confirmed that she really liked it. Freya noticed some device and asked Fujimura about it. He explained that sooner or later they would have to deal with human enemies, and in such cases, it was more useful to take them alive, because although Freya's weapon delivered a devastating blow, the new device he made was intended for a different type of combat. Elto, which Fujimura also called Naginji, had little mana, but this equipment could collect and conduct even weak mana signals, temporarily enhancing her physical strength. Freya pondered the consequences of this mana accumulation mechanism, and Fujimura said that even without Elto's help she was already extremely strong, a force of nature herself, an A-rank heavyweight with the rough strength of a gorilla. Her mana output was relatively weak and the enhancement lasted briefly, but with successful use the chance to rise even higher, possibly to S-rank, seemed real. He noted that the power of the equipment could be easily adjusted to her natural strength, so it was perfect for neutralizing vulnerable people. He named the equipment Shippo. When the last of the slave traders tried to escape Elto, he collided with another figure and fell to the ground, then looked up. The man was shocked when he saw Vito Rai standing in his way. Unfazed, Vito muttered that this fight seemed difficult, but admitted that he somehow had to do his part. The fallen man shouted to Fujimura with victorious laughter that this was their end, and explained that Vito Rai was not an ordinary opponent, because he was once a knight of the Sacred Imperial Order of Imperizer, considered one of the strongest in the world, and returned to the front line as deputy captain of the Imperial Knights. Moreover, he held a high position in their organization, but Vito suddenly struck the man on the head and dismissed his claim. He said that from now on he was only a wanted fugitive pursued by an entire nation, and that for him only a life in the shadows of society remained. Freya, stunned by the revelation, asked if he really had once been a holy knight, and Fujimura inquired about his strength. Freya explained, knights were elite warriors raised from childhood in strict discipline, loyal to their countries, and skilled in advanced combat strategies. Even the lowest among them were said to have the strength of a rank B fighter. Their experience was critically important in the war of humans against demons. And it was not an ordinary knight. Before her stood the former deputy captain of Empirizer, a title too formidable for her to even imagine his true power. Meanwhile, Vito casually stretched out his hand, noticing that a lot of time had passed and a little effort wouldn't hurt. He complained that life had lost its flavor, no matter where he went. Deciding to start with what he considered the greatest threat, he targeted Freya, the healer. He suddenly lunged at her with a clear intent. But just as he approached closer, a strong kick from Elto hit him, knocked him off his feet. He looked up at her, caught off guard, and admitted that it had almost turned into a danger. Fujimura was stunned by the strength and speed of Elto's intervention. Vito, although arrogant, quickly began to consider options because, as a person known for the ability to sense danger, he knew how to survive and exactly when to retreat without hesitation if things went against him. His most refined ability, simply put, was self-preservation. Vito scratched his head and weighed the options, as the balance of advantages and disadvantages within him was rapidly changing. He realized that perhaps it was time to retreat, but first decided to assess the combat capabilities of the opponents, and though reluctantly, took out a powerful resource, a valuable magical stone of Class A. It was an analysis stone. It visually showed the strength of the target, gave an idea of its hidden potential, and determined the class of any cursed seals. At first, he directed it at Elto. When the magic worked, a vision appeared before him. The blade hovered next to him. And there was more, much more. He observed her aura and combat essence in Rost form. She was not close to the top of her rank at all, but was practically already halfway into S-class and had enormous potential for further growth. Vito was stunned and at the same time irritated. This was work that deserved a solid reward. He shifted his gaze to Freya. She tensed as soon as their eyes met. The analysis worked again, and the vision began. At first there was darkness, then a distant light appeared. He raised his eyes and saw a shining ring of light, and behind it something very sinister was hiding. The atmosphere changed. He froze, alarmed. Her aura was incredibly fierce. It was not just a strong presence. It was oppressive, as if an entire army stood before him in one body. He thought the elf would be the strongest. This assumption was completely shattered. Then Vito turned his attention to Fujimura, and he calmly asked if everything was all right, while Vito, embarrassed, looked away and tried to assess this seemingly ordinary man. The young carefree inventor might be hiding something important. Suddenly, a nightmare scene appeared before Vito's eyes. Chains appeared and tightly wrapped around him. sticking to every part of his body. The grass beneath his feet turned into a dark, reflective liquid. He was being pulled underwater. Panic seized him. He could not breathe. He needed to break to the surface immediately, otherwise he risked drowning in the depths of this vision. His eyes opened wide in horror as a grotesque creature appeared, controlling the chains and opening its deep maw. He was consumed by terror. And then the vision suddenly shattered. The stone for analysis cracked and broke apart in his hand, stopping the magical projection. Vito fell to his knees. He grabbed his head, trembled, and gasped for breath. Fujimura looked at him with curious surprise, noticed the heavy breathing and obvious distress, guessed something was leaking, offered a napkin, but Vito gritted his teeth and was still trembling from the memory that woke him during the analysis because of the same suffocating presence. The reason why he once fled from the front line and suffered disgrace returned. Then he used the stone of analysis on the demon and saw its true form. Fear never left him. And now before him stood, it seemed, an ordinary man, but Vito again felt that oppressive aura. His body instinctively commanded him to flee. Fujimura stood quietly and waited for Vito's next move. Vito took a deep breath and admitted defeat. He knew when it was better to retreat. He smiled slightly and quietly pondered. Even if there was only an elf there, he would still have a chance, but these two terrible anomalies, Freya and Fujimura, completely tipped the scales against him. He had no cards left. But Fujimura did not want to forgive. Without retreating, he declared that there would be no mercy. Vito blinked, confused. Fujimura made it clear that after Vito had almost killed Freya, he was not going to do the same. Freya tried to ease the tension and waved it off, and Vito also tried to downplay what had happened. He said there was no serious harm and that the odds were never in his favor from the start, but Fujimura did not believe this, approached threateningly with a wrench in his hand, and ordered Vito to be silent and not move. Vito nervously tried to persuade him, silently wondering what was wrong with this boy. None of his words got through. He clenched his teeth. Vito suddenly offered to share valuable information for free, and it concerned not only Fujimura, but also his little friend. Fujimura noticed this. He looked at the she-wolf girl. She looked into his eyes with innocent curiosity. To Fujimura, she seemed no more dangerous than a small, cute puppy. Then he turned to Vito and said that if Vito wanted a pardon, he better ask Pipswick for permission. Vito shuddered, hearing that he had to humiliate himself before a former slave girl, but still forced himself to look at the girl, apologized, begged for forgiveness, and promised to change. Fujimura replied coldly that it was the death penalty. Vito turned pale. In panic, he promised that he could be useful. He could help in many ways. Freya said that they should at least listen to him. She wanted to find out what this information about her was. Fujimura, still looking stern, gave in. They agreed to listen. Vito relaxed a bit and acknowledged the success of the negotiations. Then he pointed to Eltico. According to Vito, Eltico was cursed. Freya was caught off guard by this. Vito explained that elves are naturally known for their magical abilities, but he hardly felt any mana from her. The cause was a curse known as Magu, the mana devourer. It is an ancient form of powerful control magic that consumes mana directly at its source. It was a powerful and forbidden curse, operating on a level far above the curse of the beast woman. He added that he had no idea how Eltico could even use a human, and the very fact that she could create any magic even for a short time was a true miracle, and Freya became worried and asked what could be done about it. Vito grimly explained that such control magic usually requires either the death of the one who cast it or a release spell of equal power to remove it. The mage's curse was especially dangerous. Even if the caster is killed, the curse remains. The only way to completely remove it is to destroy the bearer, that is, the person on whom it rests. Freya remained, trying to comprehend the full weight of what Vito had just revealed. Vito quietly thought that if someone really managed to curse the mage on the elf, then Eltico herself must be a monster. Only someone of the highest rank in Zafat could have cast such a powerful curse. Most likely it is Maledic, the dark mage, known as the chief bringer of misfortunes. Freya remembered those names. It was a large criminal organization known for slave trading. They said it had tens of thousands of members, and the main base was in Bonus. Vito confirmed this detail, and Fujimura raised an eyebrow, thinking that Vito should be worried about revealing all this. Vito shrugged. He did not feel any particular loyalty to Zafat. For him, his own survival was the top priority. He finished the job and was ready to return. He calmly added that just in case, it would be better to come up with a decent excuse for the boss when they return. But when Vito was about to leave, Fujimura stopped him with a wrench and insisted that he give them a ride because they also had business at the Bonus. Fujimura even offered Vito to take them directly to the Syndicate hideout center. Vito was puzzled. It seemed Fujimura did not hear any warnings. That place was teeming with scoundrels. Vito doubted whether Fujimura was really serious. If Zafat found out he was betraying them, he would be killed. But Fujimura looked back at Elto and the wolf girl, and promised them that he would soon lift the curse. Both girls were noticeably moved. The she-wolf gently hugged him and called him Fuji. Fujimura laughed and, joking about her stature, habitually nicknamed her Pipsqueak. She called him Fuji even more warmly again. Then Fujimura's tone became grim. No suffering could compare to what was done to these girls, and he decided to tear Zafat to pieces. Vito was scared and begged him to calm down. But Fujimura, enraged, declared that he would never forgive the kidnapping of children. Soon the K-truck engine started. Fujimura ordered Vito to get in. Vito muttered curses under his breath, not understanding why he had to go with them. Despite the strength of the new allies, he did not like this situation. But Fujimura repeated the order, resolute and uncompromising. Later, when everyone was sitting in the truck, Vito muttered that he really felt as if he was the one being kidnapped. Fujimura replied that criminals do not have the luxury of choice. Eventually, they reached the bonus, the second largest city of Goldoro. There were many people in the city. The city was abundant with exotic stones and trade. Freya was impressed by the scale and variety, and the streets were filled with beer establishments and noisy crowds. Fujimura announced that the registration was completed. He praised a man named Ganshan and said that although he was the king of a small country, he was still a king and was generous enough to lend them a decent sum of money, so now they could live in comfort for some time. But the calm did not last long. A gang of rough men noticed them, and one of them said that light targets had just arrived. Another noticed the openly displayed gold of Fujimura, mocking his carelessness, and declared he would take it as payment for naivety. Vito sighed inwardly, trying not to attract attention, and it was exactly that kind of attention he did not want. One of the bandits recognized him and greeted him, surprised that Vito had become respectable. He hit Fujimura on the back, called the group Vito's new slaves, mocked his appearance, called him a vulgar guy, suggested he was some clumsy provincial nobleman, asked how much Vito would sell him for, and the conversation shifted to Vito's supposed new status in the organization, with the men teasing him about a possible joining. But suddenly one of them was hit on the head with a wrench. He immediately fell. Fujimura stood over him and said that if they were looking for work, they better look elsewhere, because the organization they admired so much would soon turn to ruins. 50 years have passed since her daughter disappeared without warning. During this time, her husband's condition worsened. He became weak and barely walks. Once their daughter was gentle and a reliable support at home, always helping with chores and taking care of the younger children. She was the light of their life and their treasure. Even after so many years, the mother still remembered her daughter's voice and innocent smile, as if it happened yesterday. If the daughter had survived, she would now be 56, but the mother still kept her clothes and could not throw away a single thing. That day left a permanent regret in her that she was not there and could not protect her daughter. Fujimura had earlier listened to the old woman's story that day, and since then it had not left him alone. It was such stories that made him beat people who caused such pain. The woman insisted on seeing her daughter at least once before dying. To apologize for her inability to protect her, she was already 80. Her tears and trembling voice did not leave him. Fujimura considered himself just a craftsman, an old man without real power. He had no real means to help, but he squeezed the hand tighter. And to think that maybe he could have done something. That night again in the bonus. The dinner plates were empty. Freya and Vito silently watched Fujimura, who was clearly in high spirits. The town was teeming with delicious food, alcohol, and lively life, exactly the kind of place you like. He said that tomorrow he would seriously get to work, go to the market for new equipment, and maybe even visit the one called the Great Sage. Vito shuddered from this. The Great Sage actually headed the judicial system and was not on their side, but Fujimura did not look worried and decided it was time to finish for today and prepare for an early start tomorrow. Vito was already thinking about how to leave, wanted to go earlier than something unpredictable happened, but Fujimura did not let him go, placed a heavy hand on his shoulder, and said they were going to another bar because the night was still young. Vito tried to refuse, said he needed sleep, and without 12 hours of rest he was always irritable, but Fujimura only smiled, squeezed his hand tighter, and insisted he would take care of everything, so Vito gave in and agreed. When they were walking to the door, Fujimura cheerfully told the others not to worry and promised they would not overdo it, and behind them the wolf girl started crying and called Fujimura. Freya gently held her and watched as they walked away. She noticed Fujimura's bright smile as he led them into the night. Later, walking through the city, Vito asked where they were going and joked that maybe they should stop by the place where his sister works. Fujimura meant something else, a video about a hideout. Vito was stunned. He could not believe that Fujimura was serious, and moreover, Fujimura planned to go alone. Fujimura explained that this plan of his arose only from personal motivation, and he did not want others to get involved because of his own selfishness. Vito sighed to himself. If he stayed with this madman much longer, it did not matter how many lives he had, he would still lose them. But looking at Fujimura's determined back, something occurred to him. Vito suddenly left, telling Fujimura to go die in his own time. But in an instant, Fujimura used his ring and appeared right in front of Vito. Stunned, Vito barely managed to react. Before Fujimura struck the ground with a wrench, breaking the stone beneath him and making the earth tremble. Vito was nervous. Fujimura admitted that he might have been wrong and was the one who asked for the favor, so Vito had no choice but to help. Vito was confused. It resembled some kind of spatial transition technique, although he thought such things only happened in fairy tales. Fujimura's physical enhancement seemed unreal, and Vito did not understand who this guy was. Fujimura asked again if he should smash Vito's head as a black atonement for all his past sins. Vito, stunned, surrendered. Finally, they reached their destination. Vito announced that they had arrived. Before them in the water struggled a huge fish-like creature. Fujimura was impressed by the scale of it all, and Vito explained that this was exactly why Zafat, the colossal criminal syndicate, had never been overthrown. In the heart of Bonus was hidden a dungeon, a waterfall labyrinth known as the Aquarium. The syndicate's headquarters was right at its center. It was on the 15th level, so deep that no slave trying to escape would have a chance. Then Vito approached, pressed a hidden stone, and a secret passage opened. It was a closed path only for the organization's top leadership. Fujimura doubted the sudden change in behavior and suspected Vito's motives, while Vito attributed it to the nighttime mood, but himself considered it an opportunity. If he managed to manipulate Fujimura and use his power to tame several strong monsters, maybe the rest of the syndicate would be forced to recognize him as the true leader. He smiled thinking about this as they descended the stairs. He was considering backup options. If something went wrong, he could always disappear into another criminal underworld. Soon, they found themselves before a large metal door. These were the last gates separating them from the heart of the hideout. Vito pressed his hand into the built-in magic circle. He explained that the gate was made of steel as thick as a warrior's arm and enchanted with a magic stone that repels all forms of magic. The only way to open it was to apply a certain mana signature. But when he tried to activate it, he froze. Cursing, he punched the gate with his fist. His key person was removed. They found out about his betrayal sooner than expected. Sighing, Vito leaned his back against the wall, defeated. He told Fujimura that they had reached a dead end. No one could open the gate without the magical key, and now that he had revealed himself, someone was surely pursuing them. Fujimura approached the gate and assessed it with a masterful eye. He estimated it to be about 1,000 millimeters thick. Without saying a word, he reached into the spatial storage and took out a set of equipment, asked Vito to step aside, and Vito watched in confusion. When Fujimura laid out a set of strange tools and said he was going to open the gate, Vito laughed irritably because Fujimura was not listening, and without a person with the proper signature, there was no way to bypass the magical steel, but Fujimura calmly put on gloves and confidently replied that steel is just steel. He said he would show me what he calls modern magic. He pulled out something resembling a metal torch, lit it, adjusted the flame, and began to explain. It was a cutting torch with regulators, fuel gas supply valves, oxygen, a sediment trap, and several special controls. By combining oxygen and the sediment trap, the tool was designed for precise cutting of thick steel. First, the metal was heated to about 800–900 degrees, just until it became light orange. Then, opening the cutting valve, a high-temperature jet cut through the metal. Vito stood stunned, watching the blue flame cut into the gate. Fujimura moved the cutter evenly, maintaining a constant speed and height, watching for barely noticeable shifts in the steel. This was a part of the gate once considered impenetrable. They cut cleanly, and he fell heavily to the ground. Fujimura turned off the flashlight. The magnificent enchanted steel doors, designed so that they could not be broken by magic, now had a rectangular hole cut in the middle. He said that this tool has limitations and struggles with some metals like aluminum or stainless steel, but it is cheap, reliable, and doesn't even require electricity. If it encounters something tougher, it simply switches to plasma cutting. Vito stood with his mouth open. There was no sense in this. Fujimura spoke in terms Vito had never heard, some strange devices he did not understand, doing things that seemed like magic but without any magic. He demanded to know who Fujimura really was. Fujimura waved it off with a smile and told him to stop worrying. He was just a humble craftsman. In the night silence, she noticed that Fujimura still had not returned and recalled his words that this was the best time for adults to have fun. Yet still, the fact that he was still outside so late caused concern. When she approached the window, she noticed the young she-wolf Pip pacing outside. Unexpected to see her at such a time. Freya doubted her presence. Pip responded with cheerful determination. She was setting out to look for Fujimura. Freya hesitated, realizing how large the city was and how hard it was to find someone in it. But she remembered that Pip, as a beast person, had a sense of smell much sharper than a human's, probably 100 times sharper, yet still recalled that Fujimura called this the time of adults. She decided that it would be too dangerous to let Pip go alone. She offered to accompany her. Suddenly, Elto spoke up and said he would join too. Freya was surprised that Elto was there as well. Meanwhile, deep inside the hideout, Fujimura and Vito watched the lively hustle and bustle below. Members of the organization are drinking and celebrating. Vito explained that this was a gathering place where they awaited orders and that 100 people stood guard around the clock to protect it. Fujimura decided they should quietly leave before being noticed and said that this secret passage turned out to be very useful. Vito agreed with a sly smile, but before they could continue, they were interrupted. A large seal-like creature blocks their path. Gemma-Shill, a beast patrolling the back passages of the labyrinth. Weighing over a ton, it was no ordinary monster, and Vito warned that it was one of the most dangerous creatures in Aquaria, which Fujimura would have to worry about, but before he could finish reporting, Fujimura already struck the monster on the head with a wrench. He knocked it unconscious and did not stop. Vito watched, impressed. He was not surprised by Fujimura's decisive actions. As they moved forward, Vito told Fujimura that the next chamber was the slave room, a detention center mainly for women and children. When they entered, a sad scene unfolded. The prisoners looked depressed and hopeless. When Fujimura noticed the slave brand on the girl's shoulder, his eyes narrowed, and he felt the weight of the moment. Meanwhile, Vito pinched his nose from the stench, mocked their filthiness, and waved it off because they were going to be sold anyway. Fujimura stepped forward and declared he would break in, and Vito was taken aback. Fujimura said he would free each of them to the last one. He rummaged through the equipment and took out a saber saw. The electric tool, which quickly moves the blade back and forth and cuts various materials well, had interchangeable blades and did not produce sparks, so it was suitable for enclosed spaces, and he handed Vito a metal hacksaw, a compact hand tool convenient in tight spaces, and asked for help. Vito looked at the tool distrustfully, barely realizing the situation. Outside, Freya, Pip, and Elto approached a place that seemed to be the entrance to a hideout. Pip stopped and sniffed the air near the rocky slope. Freya asked if she sensed anything and suggested that a device might be hidden in the rock. As they were thinking about what to do next, a voice sounded behind them, asking what two young women were doing there at such an hour, hinting at suspicion. Freya tried to diffuse the situation with nervous laughter and explained that they were just looking for someone. The man smoothly descended from his place and landed nearby. He carefully examined them, then placed his hand on a certain stone. A mechanical click sounded from inside the rocks. Standing by the stone entrance, he decided that the group had stumbled upon a hidden storage. Introducing himself as a clerk, he led them and offered to show the place. Freya noticed with surprise that there really was an entrance in the stone. The man asked them to stay close because, due to the hidden nature of the place, there were strange winding passages, and it was easy to get lost. He also hinted that they would probably like what was ahead, while deep inside the hideout Fujimura managed to free the slaves. The last chamber opened, and the rescued women, grateful, began to express thanks. Several girls thanked Vito personally. One approached Fujimura to thank him. After that, Vito turned his attention to the next target, Maldic, the boss at the top of the chain. He pointed to the corridor and explained that the path from there was simple. Just go right down the corridor, and it would lead straight to him. Instead of rushing forward immediately, Fujimura handed Vito a pouch of coins. Vito was initially surprised and did not understand the gesture, but then he felt the weight and realized the value of the gold. Fujimura smiled and gave the money as thanks for everything Vito had done so far. He made it clear that this was a farewell gift. It was not much, but perhaps enough for Vito to start over somewhere far away from all this. Fujimura insisted that he take the freed prisoners and leave the city. It was time for Vito to give up the life of a criminal. When Fujimura turned away and waved, Vito stood silently, feeling the weight of the moment. Later, he said that Fujimura was really going to confront Maldicalan, but he himself admitted that perhaps he would not win. But for him, retreat now would cause more regret than defeat. His conviction was obvious. Vito's expression changed. He pressed his lips tightly. Then they gave another piece of advice. Fujimura was to beware of another person. There was another dangerous character, as crazy and formidable as Meldick. If Fujimura found himself against both at the same time, he should immediately retreat. The man's name was Bastilla. He had beastly strength and had crushed an entire knight group sent to capture him. Without a doubt, he was a genuine S-rank threat. Meanwhile, Freya, Pip, and Elto followed the clerk through the entrance, and the man warned them to be careful because it was slippery and dangerous to walk ahead. While Fujimura and Vito were talking, someone was watching them from afar, reclining in a plush chair, muttering impatiently and waiting for Fujimura's arrival, smiling broadly in anticipation. Meanwhile, Vito and the rescued slaves emerged from the shelter. Vito gave each one a gold coin in turn, placing it in their palms. When their chains were broken, their future now belonged only to them. What they would do next and where they would go, they would decide themselves. One of the girls asked where Vito was going. Vito said he was returning inside. His goal had not changed. He still aspired to become the head of the organization, and for that, he needed to know what was happening inside now. But as he descended the stairs again, doubts crowded his thoughts, to return under C's control. Now that his betrayal was exposed, such dreams were pointless. His chance had already passed. But in his thoughts, the image of Fujimura remained. That madman who rushed in alone, full of that crazy idealism. Better to lose together than to stand alone and lose everything. If Fujimura truly believed in his naive ideals, Vito would see how far this foolishness could lead. In another part of the hideout, Fujimura stood before huge ominous doors with a skull. He looked up and thought about how far his stubborn approach had taken him. So far, he had not been wrong. These were probably the gates to Meldick, the man at the top. They were huge and likely locked by some mechanism created by humans, but before he could take another step, the doors creaked and opened by themselves. The room was dark and minutes hung heavily in it. Inside sat Meldick himself. Behind his high-backed chair, a skeleton gave an empty rattle. Meldick greeted Fujimura, saying that this was the very top of the underworld of Zafat. Fujimura recognized him immediately, the man behind this dirty den. Fujimura clenched his fists. Enough talking. Fujimura came to put Meldick down, but Meldick only laughed. Meldick was convinced that this lonely young man could do nothing against him, but admitted that he was curious. He told everything he knew about Fujimura, how he used transition magic and cut through impenetrable gates with strange but effective techniques. These feats resembled nothing he had seen before and truly caught his attention. Fujimura froze. Meldick explained that the city and the dungeons were strewn with magical stones that gave it eyes everywhere. He watched closely, and all of Fujimura's actions looked strange. Unexpectedly and unpredictably, Meldick showed a magical projection of three familiar figures, Freya, Pip, and Elto, who were led by Bastia. He admitted that at first he was only observing the former Knight Vittori, who betrayed him, but in the process he came across something much more interesting. Fujimura darkened upon seeing the girls, because they were not supposed to be here. The sinister chuckle was his reaction. One of them, although he fled, foolishly turned back to him, his magical ends focused on Elto's face. Meldick continued, but still one of the three was a Mago elf, born right here, and he noticed that Fujimura was probably also interested in his little slave, the guinea pig. The phrase experimental slave struck Fujimura like a blow, and Meldick called Elto an amazing success, a random but extraordinary creature from another place. Bastilla led Freya, Pippa, and Elto through the door, and when they entered, he said it was a legendary snack bar. But inside it was muffled and dark. A dry, sharp crack disturbed the silence. The skull rolled across the floor. Its empty eye sockets looked at them. Freya froze, a sound was heard, and the lights suddenly illuminated the room. Before them stood a grotesque device. A long table covered with skulls, a chair with spikes, a necklace of thorns among various tools and countless skeletons. Behind them, the door suddenly closed. Freya sharply turned to Bastia. With a self-satisfied smile, he showed them what he called his pride, his torture chamber. Freya stood unbelieving. Bastia reproached them for excessive trust in people. Then, turning to Pip, he noted her return to this hellish place. Holding the skeleton, Bastia mocked her, saying these were the remains of those who helped her escape, that they would not mourn her capture, and that it did not matter because he had already stripped them to the bones, and one of them, according to him, had a particularly disgusting taste. Pip was overwhelmed by the memory of a kind beastman who once promised to save her. He had a child her age, and he promised to get her out. Tears welled up in her eyes, and Bestia laughed maniacally. But then the lieutenant colonel's foot hit him in the face and interrupted him. Her eyes burned with cold fury. Bestia staggered and screamed in pain. She was met with a brutal blow and was insultingly growled at, and Elto crashed into the wall. Frey's eyes widened in horror when they saw blood. Blood was running down Eltiko's face. Fujimura saw all this on the magical screen. Meldick, still sitting, mocked the situation. Fujimura's allies were clearly in trouble. He noticed that an A rank like Eltiko could not compare to an S rank like Bastilla. But Fujimura had something to say and addressed Meldick with a question. Before she used Magu on Eltiko, she was significantly stronger, and Mulder acknowledged this. They wanted to make elves in Nita power the perfect weapon. She was dangerous even before birth. So just in case, he placed a curse on her as soon as she was born. Fujimura thanked him for the response. Maldek was embarrassed. Fujimura explained that in that case, he would simply break the cursed vessel and restore the original power of Eltiko. Maldek raised an eyebrow, so Fujimura already knew how to release the mage, but it is unknown if he can actually do it. To test him, Maldek showed a steel box, a vessel in which there was Magu. No one had managed to break it so far. It was forged from an unbreakable magical stone. Fujimura looked at the box. It seemed strangely familiar. A memory came back. Once someone showed him a rare item made by Yamada Seisaka Shu, and during the conversation microscopic letters became visible, and the engraving on the base was only 3 and had a thickness of 1/1000. Approximately 1/130 the thickness of a sheet of paper. The surface was flawless. Such precision cannot be achieved by machines alone. It had to be done manually. For Fujimura, there was no doubt. Such engineering could not have originated in this world. This box had to come from his world, from his Earth. But still, the question remained how an object made so precisely ended up in this strange place. Fujimura demanded to know where Maldek got that mysterious, extremely exquisite box. Maldek casually explained that it was a family relic from his predecessor, probably forged in Idzuma. There were even rumors that it dated back to ancient times. When he spoke, the monster's magical eye in the form of a skull glowed and filled with energy. The creature lunged at Fujimura, but he calmly and without hesitation destroyed it with a single blow. The skull monster froze from the sudden defeat. Maldek watched with interest and quietly admired the precision and power of Fujimura's strike. Fujimura said he intended to finish everything quickly. He had no time for games. In the blink of an eye, he rushed at Maldek, but a sudden blow pushed him back. A transparent shield appeared around Maldek's body, neutralizing the attack. A letter that could inform him that the barrier completely blocked physical strikes. Fujimura retreated to reassess everything once more. He was surprised that such technology or magic existed in this world. Maldek introduced himself as a dark mage and explained that for mages, physical defense was a given. According to his calculations, Fujimura's physical abilities corresponded to 6th level technique, so he was approximately a B-rank warrior. Strong but fundamentally a physical specialist without magical advantage, and Maldek acknowledged that Fujimura's ability to transform became an unexpected problem. But in the end, he managed it. Suddenly, sharp objects began to protrude from the walls. They turn out to be a pack of fish-like monsters with long, sharp noses. They begin to move down. Maldek threw down the gauntlet. It was interesting whether Fujimura could avoid everyone. In response, Fujimura's body tensed, and a supernatural alertness appeared in his eyes. When the terrible swarm poured down like a rain of thorns, it moved smoothly and flawlessly. Every attack missed, he dodged them all. All the monsters were pressed into the floor, and Fujimura stood unharmed. Maldek fell silent from surprise, stunned by the feat. Fujimura coldly remarked that such weak enemies were not even worth spending his transitional ability on. The fish-like creatures shattered into fragments. From the corridor, Vito secretly peered through the door. Eventually, he realized that Fujimura managed to avoid all the blows. At that moment, Vito began to believe that Fujimura could really defeat the Maldives. Maledik, still wide-eyed, whispered quietly in amazement. Precision, control, such raw talent at such a young age. He wanted to know where Fujimura was from and what family he belonged to. The instincts of a seeker flared up. He longed to tear Fujimura apart and learn everything about him. He was not as interested since Altiko. Fujimura repeated the word guinea pig and asked what exactly Altiko was. He sent it by mail and confessed. LTCO was a hybrid of an elf and a demon, a forbidden and unnatural creature. Vito, who was still watching, looked noticeably worried. Fujimura silently looked at Maldek. On the screen, Eltiko was supported by Pip and Freya. Her face was covered in blood. Maldek added that it was a hideous fusion, a union born of the highest taboo. Meanwhile, Freya pulled out a pistol and fired not at the enemy, but to heal Eltiko. Her wounds healed and Eltiko took her stance again, ready to fight once more. Freya exhaled and thought quickly. She could not risk shooting in such a confined space. All she could do was continue healing. Bastia groaned, irritated that treating her turned out to be so difficult. Eltico proved to be more resilient than it seemed, and the fight was clearly going to drag on. He muttered that he would like to play with her even more. Melodic laughed through the magical link and mocked Bistia, because he supposedly could not handle those whom Melodic called a pair of miserable slaves, and Bistia sharply replied, insisting that everything was under his control. Turning to Eltico, Bastia told her to stop hesitating and use that thing, the secret weapon she was hiding. He knew it was worth it. Estia, deciding first to get rid of the problematic weapon, took the pistol from Freya. Both Freya and Eltico froze in place. When he was inspecting the weapon, Bastilla looked at Freya, licked her face, and showed an anxious fixation on human women. He said she would be left for last, like a palate cleanser after the rest. Eltico moved to intervene, but Bastia immediately reacted and struck her with a brutal blow. She flew back and hit the wall. Blood poured from her mouth as she fell. Lying down and coughing, Freya rushed to her. Bastia loomed over them and mocked Eltico. They demanded to know what life was like after escaping the facility. Eltico, trembling and bloodied, tried to speak, but blood flowed from her lips again. Bastia sneered contemptuously, noticing her black hair, devoid of mana and a symbol of elven heresy. He guessed that life outside was no better than what she endured here. He recalled the outburst of anger that once engulfed her, and now seemed to understand that it stemmed from the same shame and suffering. From afar, Vito watched everything through a monitor. His thoughts raced. He did not understand why they were still there. It was hopeless. They had no chance against Bastilla. Eltico tried to get up. But another brutal kick from the beast pushed her back onto the floor. He rudely demanded to know who gave her permission to move. For the fact that you flinched. The beast continued his tirade, claiming that slaves have no human rights. Wherever she ran, Eltico was still just a tool to them. Frey clenched his teeth in helpless anger and, as Bastilla added, although Eltico's mother, a former researcher, once escaped from them, the daughter would not have such luck. He promised to grind Eltico's bones to dust by the end of the day. When the pain intensified, Eltico's consciousness drifted away. She found herself again in fragments of ancient memories, where a warm presence was barely felt. The gentle voice of a young woman, her mother quietly apologized, handing over the baby Eltico. Called Lafro, a small stone filled with mana. She kept it specifically for this day. It was a one-time transition stone. The device could teleport one person, and if Lafro used it, it would take her directly to the elf village, a refuge beyond the reach of their kidnappers. In those dim memories, the baby Lafro quietly smiled, holding the woman's finger. The child called for her mother, a woman with eyes full of tears. She held the child close and whispered a final request to live for both of them, because as long as Lafel lived, she would one day find happiness and smile again. But this moment of tenderness was suddenly interrupted. Enemies approached, cries were heard. A woman named Resolute threw the child into a safe place. She knew that Lafel's path would be difficult, the curse would weigh on her, and the trials would not cease. But she believed that someday someone there would take care of her daughter. Love her, give her a reason to smile. This farewell wish lived long in Eltico's soul. Now Eltico stood up again, beaten and bleeding, but unyielding. She stepped forward and stood before Freya, shielding her. Eltico, whose life was full of rejection, contempt, and exploitation, never knew kindness or luck, but now it no longer mattered to her. She stood firm. Freya, overwhelmed with emotions, cried and begged her to stop, but Eltico said the only reason for her life was to protect Freya. And she did not back down. Vito, watching from afar, froze, his eyes widening as he saw her determination. Somewhere else he sat self-satisfied and detached, looking with contempt. He hated emotional speeches and righteous determination. Such fervent, sentimental determination spoiled his mood. He activated magic and created a small sphere. He ordered his men to gather in the cafe and promised them a feast, a brutal metaphor for the future violence. The soldiers laughed among themselves. Finally, Maldic let them go to those he was talking about. There were women too, and they noticed this with glee. First come, first served. They mocked and impatiently waited for the chance to rush in. The beast tried again to rule in armor and assured that everything was under control. He even transformed, but Melodic rejected this idea. He turned again to his people. Tell them that it is about giving those who still resisted a taste of despair, a reminder of how cruelly insurmountable reality can be. He considered their refusal to surrender merely empty resistance. Inevitable, devastating defeat awaited the fools who still hoped. Vito clenched his teeth in anger and reluctantly admitted the truth of Maldic's words. Those who did not want to see the truth were simply lost in their illusions, but something stirred within him, and he rushed to act. ran into the tunnel and rushed to the meeting place where the people of Meldic gathered. The group was already grumbling in anticipation, not understanding why they were trying so hard for some foreign guests. Someone waved it off but still waited to enjoy it. Vito arrived and stood before them. One of the men met him with a smirk, immediately recognizing him. They mocked him. Vito Rai, a coward, he appeared here, but clearly not to stop them. They laughed even louder and mocked the idea, because the tearful coward Vito wants to be a hero. It was absurd. They recalled his past. Once he was a knight, but fled from battle and abandoned his comrades. Yet Vito stood firm and admitted it himself. He was also shocked by what he had done. Thoughts about El Tico and Fujimura filled his head. That same disgraced, miserable former knight returned not to flee, but to confront the monsters he once ran from. He came to stop them. It was Kolo, a small eastern state, and it was there that Vito, the eldest son of a noble family, was born. On a clear day, a dignified man arrived in a magnificent carriage, and people gathered and watched in awe, whispers spreading among them about the enormous creature accompanying him, recognizing him as the commander of the unyielding knights, Colossus Guardian. Women fainted when he passed by. From the window above, 10-year-old Vito watched with shining eyes and could not contain his admiration. Vito descended by the rope to greet the man personally. An imposing figure caught him in the air and lifted the boy onto his shoulders. Vito's father stood nearby. He shone with pride and teasingly mocked his son while those present laughed. The boy did not quite understand then, but his father was everything to him, the strongest knight in the country, the pride of their lands. Vito's only goal in life was to become like him, worthy to stand beside him. One day Vito overheard soldiers discussing a departure to the northern forest. Rumors said there were demons there, and that day everything changed. Everything happened suddenly. His father returned beaten and broken, standing over a slain demon. He had lost a limb. Vito, in tears, threw himself at his father's feet and apologized again and again. He had disobeyed orders and entered the forbidden forest. And the result was obvious. His recklessness cost his father dearly. Overwhelmed with guilt, Vito sobbed and wondered why his father decided to save someone so weak, who could not even defeat his younger brothers. His father, smiling through the pain, told him to hold his head high and did not notice that Vito was whining. To him, Vito was a treasure, his most precious one, and if he had to protect this treasure with only half his body, so be it. That was something to be proud of. He warned Vito, if Vito ran away from this, he would regret it for his whole life. Once, father said that Vito would one day understand what it means when something is more important than one's own life. These were the last words Vito heard from him. Now standing before the mocking crowd of Melodic people, Vito is silent. They mocked him, not believing that he could stop them. One called him crazy and laughed at the idea that he supposedly wanted to face 100 by himself. They recalled Maldic's words. That the former knight could not be trusted even the slightest. This time there will be no escape, no chance to flee. In his thoughts, Vito again saw the chains that bound him. He had already fled before to save his life, but the years that came were no better than death. He mentally addressed his father and apologized for losing his way and losing sight of what is important. It was already too late to fix the past. And yet something stirred within him. Now he remembered it. His father's smile, the pride in his voice, the warmth from being called a treasure, and the spirit that once lived in him awakened again. After so many years, he felt his knightly pride again, and no longer running away, Vito finally stood firm. He openly confessed without shame that he had done terrible things with the very same man who stood before him. He did not expect peace or redemption, not for a man like him. The soldiers were confused and did not understand his sudden change, but Vito no longer hid. If this is the end, so be it. He will fight, and if he must fall, he will fall like a true villain, with pride and determination. One of the men laughed mockingly and said that he had always felt that something was wrong with Vito, because there was at least a drop of pity for the slaves in his eyes. Vito was mistaken if he thought that the same slaves would pity him. He was simply going to his execution, a traitor who had no place calling himself a knight. The man mocked, saying that he knew so-called Vito's fencing too well to take it seriously. They almost pitied him. He was just another exhausted former knight. But Vito raised his hand, and sparks lit up at his fingertips. Lightning broke through. Without warning, Vito released a discharge that hit the man's chest and threw him back in a burning arc. The rest froze, confusion reigned around. Someone muttered in disbelief. It was lightning magic. A burly giant named Groton stepped forward and disdainfully said that the miserable freak supposedly had magic. Vito, calm and sarcastic, admitted that maybe he was just a coward by nature. When others fought with swords on the front line, he had been a magic knight in the past, a specialist in magic, not in close combat. Groton sneered and said that being a mage changed nothing. As soon as a mage exhausts all mana, he becomes ballast, powerless junk. The rest of the men picked up Groton's showy courage and loudly supported him. Grot smiled sinisterly, eagerly waiting to see how long Vito would hold out under their full attack. Meanwhile, Meldick watched the scene on the surveillance screen, his face twisted with irritation. That coward was really resisting, and Meldick muttered that he would deal with him soon. Fujimura stood nearby, calm but focused. Seeing Vito's seriousness, he silently understood that the situation was escalating, and if Vito was taking action, it was time for him to act too. Without hesitation, Fujimura activated his technique. His muscles tensed, veins bulged. A hissing ball of smoke burst from his body. He opened the second gate, named it, grabbed that name, the second gate, and was still trying to comprehend it. Fujimura had already moved on, muttering that this is what the core looks like when it works at full capacity. It was a blast of energy, as if released from hell. Meld blinked. He did not understand what the core was. Fujimura did not stop and declared that time was up, and this meant the end of restraint. From now on, it's all or nothing. Time to act at full power. He smiled contentedly as the fight intensified. Finally, they began to act seriously. Among all the resistance groups, what annoyed him the most were Fujimura's eyes. There was something in them that he could not tolerate. Suddenly, the ground split open, spiky protrusions burst through the floor, and behind them appeared hands. And then bodies, dozens of failed test subjects, rose like puppets from a nightmare. They were discarded test samples of Meldick, grotesque and distorted, but powerful, and he explained that although they were unsuccessful, they had enough strength to destroy a squad of B-class seconds. There were 66 of them and all under his command. Before he could finish boasting, Fujimura's brutal attack had already easily thrown several into the air. Meldick blinked in disbelief as Fujimura mocked him. He ridiculed the pathetic strength of his creations. Putting him against something so fragile was simply disrespectful. He planned to finish the fight quickly. Unmoved, the man activated the mechanism. The box-shaped vessel at his side started working and began releasing enhancements for the resurrected creatures. Enhanced magic, pain suppression, forced physical arousal, and increased endurance. He thought he had cornered them. Meanwhile, on another screen, Vischa grabbed Elto by the head, checkmate. Her body was withering, she was barely conscious. Bestia said that their defeat became inevitable from the moment they made enemies in his organization. He smiled contemptuously and wondered why the allies were delaying for so long. If they kept dragging it out, he would have to finish the matter himself. Freya screamed as she looked at Elto, and Bistro's grip tightened. Despite the pain, Elto barely smiled. Something triggered in Bastille. He threw her to the ground. He raged and cursed. She was persistent. Seeing her greatness, he became even angrier. He declared that he would no longer follow Meldick's orders to keep her alive. He wanted to kill her and erase that smile from her face forever. He raised his hand to deliver a fatal blow. Elto, gasping for breath, could only watch. Her mind was filled with memories, a trembling smile, and whispered apologies. And her mother. And then something stirred. Pips's eyes widened with horror as someone burst between them. Freya, fragile in body but resolute. She covered Elto with her own. Vistus's fist crashed down. And Freya falls to the floor. Her prosthesis fell nearby and shattered to pieces. Bestia stood stunned. He shouted irritably that he didn't understand what she was doing. She needed to wait her turn. He had a dessert he was saving. Elto called Freya, but there was no answer, only a barely noticeable twitch of the hand. Freya's thoughts, though weakly connected, reached him. She apologized and acknowledged the pain she endured for someone resembling her. So many joyful, sad, and unknown experiences must have shaped Elto's life. And now Freya asked her to rest and stop fighting alone. From now on, Freya would protect her. At that moment, Elto again heard her mother's voice live on Lafral. Someday there will be those who care deeply about you. The words echoed in her soul. Bestia, pale with rage, stepped on Freya's body and screamed in despair because she didn't understand why she wasn't dying and what was with those two strong hands. Elto froze in place, horror and rage mixed within her. At the same time, the vessel in Meldick's hand's grip trembled and suddenly heated up, and he hissed in pain, trying to understand what caused this surge of heat. In the cell, Pip shouted, demanding that Bastille take her foot off Freya. Then another voice joined her, the fierce resolute. It was Elto. The beast looked angrily at Elto. He did not believe that she dared to order him, but she stood firm and looked him in the eyes. She repeated and demanded that he remove his foot from Freya. Suddenly, a blinding flash of light burst from the Elto's body. Bisti became alert, instincts kicked in, and he immediately jumped back, shuddering. That stunning impulse, raw and deadly, was unmistakable. The seal had to be broken. Elsewhere, Mildek felt it too. The container he held burned his skin and glowed with unstable energy. He cursed quietly. The power was becoming more unstable than he expected. With his last strength, he managed to seal the stamp again at the last moment. The heat subsided. He breathed heavily and trembled. The fact that Elto almost broke the seal scared him. She was much more dangerous than he expected, than he understood it. He had to kill her immediately, before everything got out of control. When he looked up at the battlefield, Fujimura was standing before him, alone and still on his feet. Madic was stunned because a moment ago Fujimura had been thrown off balance, but now he stood straight, unshakable, and muttered in disbelief. Some thought that Fujimura used some kind of transitional spell, but he calmly replied that without magic and without tricks, he simply had legs like a horse. Maldek gathered his courage. He tried to calm himself, thinking that Fujimura was just another rough fighter. Even if others had fallen, he still had his elite barrier, much stronger than anything others tried to break. But even before he could finish the thought, a powerful blow from Fujimura's wrench shattered the barrier into pieces. Maldek's eyes opened wide. He didn't even have time to react when Fujimura pulled something from his pocket and threw it into the sky. Small metal objects, screws. They gleamed in the air and seemed harmless. Maldek sneered disdainfully, confused. They were nails, junk. But as soon as the screws hit his body, his thoughts scattered. When the projectiles hit, a crushing force overwhelmed him. Hardened by body-strengthening magic and thrown with Fujimura's enhanced swing, they bit deep into his flesh. He hit the ground hard. Each screw was a super-dense projectile, fast and precise. Perfect when thrown by Fujimura's wrench. They were not just random tools. In his hands they became weapons, precise, deadly, perfectly adapted to his grip. The perfect size for a one-handed throw. He didn't need magical spells or enchanted blades. All he needed were these little ladies and the wrench. Lying on the ground, wounded and gasping, he clenched the vessel in his hand. Despair gripped him. He hissed through clenched teeth and activated it again. Come out, Mori. Fujimura narrowed his eyes and watched. Something else was approaching. A disturbing thought flashed through Maldex's mind that the guy in front of him might not be human. Fujimura stood up and calmly surveyed the scene of the incident. Before taking up his megaphone, he called his comrades. Freya, barely conscious on the ground, shuddered in response. Her body was powerless, but her will was not completely broken. Vito, covered in blood and gasping, struggled to say the word chief. Pip shouted Fujimura's name, while Elto was silent and seemed lost in herself. Fujimura's voice cut through the chaos and urged them to hold on a little longer, assuring them that he would stop this now. Maldek reacted along with Aniza, while 100 men around mocked, thinking some guy wouldn't manage. Fujimura descended to Maldek without hesitation, and Bestia, seeing this, declared they were finished, and roaring, rushed at Elto. Hip did not retreat and spread her arms to protect her. The beast mockingly regarded her defiance, laughed at her small stature and determination, and mocked her attempt to be a shield. Freya could barely whisper Pips's name. Her heart was heavy. In Maldek, the instinct to destroy flared up again. He always erased any resistance. Without any exceptions, he would do the same again. He summoned Magu, a terrible creature, who immediately rushed at Fujimura. Maldek promised to take every drop of mana from him. But Fujimura was undaunted. He flew up and suddenly appeared before Maldek thanks to the transition technique. Catching the tyrant by surprise with stern determination, Fujimura unleashed upon him the full weight of Maldek's sins. Destroyed lives and the sorrow of those left behind. Long years of pain and suffering. The sealed chest was struck by a divine chisel, and a powerful explosion burst forth from it. Maldek was overthrown. Fujimura whispered to Nagazaji, apologizing for being late. The box began to crack. A small crack widened until the entire seal broke. Fujimura grant. Elto was free. The fragments of the box fell, and Maldek collapsed lifelessly to the ground. However, the danger still looms. The beast lunged at Pip with fierce intent, vowing to tear her to pieces. The point was moved forward, only to meet emptiness. Elto now stood where there had been no one before. She moved quickly and quietly, covering Pip at the last moment. Pip looked up, stunned, with wide-open eyes and speechless. Elto stood transformed. Her wounds had disappeared. Her hair fell freely. Her clothes now shone and were new. Fujimura watched with a smile. Freya slowly opened her eyes and saw the reborn Elto, who firmly lifted Pip and was ready to protect her. The beast looked on with distrust and did not understand who this woman was. Elto's response was simple, laughable. One man thinking about his difficult situation without a job decided to try the bonus next time. while another laughed and advised avoiding the bonus at all costs. Although it was the financial capital of the continent and a popular place for thrill seekers, Bonus was a dangerous place to live because only the richest could afford to live there, and for everyone else, grim options remained. Death, slavery, or addiction. There was the headquarters of the criminal organization Zafat, and the city teemed with its henchmen. The crime rate was one of the highest on the continent. The first man inquired about the big bosses who supposedly were supposed to stop this. The second man spread rumors that ministers and aristocrats were in Zafat's pockets. The economy was so closely tied to the organization that no one seemed to care. The rich squandered their wealth, while slaves worked in the shadows. The city had already been captured, and even the great sage, who was once a savior, was powerless. The first man did not believe it, but the second confirmed that he had heard about children who were kidnapped and forced to dig tunnels. The reality was grim, and ordinary people could do nothing about it. This was the sad truth of Bonus. Elsewhere, Elto gathered her courage. For the punishment she was about to apply. Bastia, mocking her, said he expected more from the one called the strongest weapon, but Elto remained the same, except she had slightly changed her hair color. When Elto hid Pip behind her, she remembered Fujimura's words about her equipment that could gather mana. Bastia considered her weak, but Lafrel stepped forward. She hovered in the air. She cast a spell that surrounded Bastia with a whirlwind of black wind. How funnily they chanted. A tornado formed, and Bastia tried to fight back, swinging his fist in defiance. But something was wrong. He heard a crack, and felt his fingers breaking and twisting in all directions. A gust of wind hit him with full force. In pain, Visca screamed, and the wind continued to strike him. Suddenly, the figure of Elto appeared before him. Now in full armor, eyes filled with stern determination. The beast was crushed beneath her, and Fujimura, watching from afar, quietly encouraged Nageji and asked to show the full power of his winds. Elto's armor shimmered as she jumped into the tornado. Her boots transformed into weapons, resembling drills. The beast tried to escape, but it was already too late. Elto's boots struck his chest with destructive force. Did it crack in ribs? And he was pushed to the ground. Blood flowed from his face, and in a moment he turned into a complete bloody mess. Elto stood unshaken. Her rage was an abyss and made previous actions obvious. Fujimura, smiling, addressed Zafat's minions through a megaphone, announced that their leader and main executor are now out of commission indefinitely. Vito, Freya, and Pip, beaten and exhausted, felt a wave of relief wash over them. Fujimura added a final sneer and said that the Zafat forces were just offended losers and idiots. The men whispered among themselves in disbelief, because Fujimura's presence and actions confused them. They could not understand how he was still standing and, moreover, fighting back, and their astonishment only grew. He was still alive, especially after defeating two formidable enemies. One of them realized this. If those two were defeated, then the one who did it must be incredibly dangerous. Vito, though bruised, confirmed their suspicion with a bitter smile, deciding that the victors were probably heading toward them at that very moment, and panic broke out among the men, who scattered in all directions. When calm prevailed for a moment, Vito sighed deeply and realized that it was not yet his time to die. Freya, still gasping, turned to Elto with quiet admiration, acknowledging what had just happened, but before the moment could settle. Elto suddenly staggered and fell. When she fell to the ground, a sharp spike burst from her hair, and Freya's eyes widened in shock. Nearby, a faint cough sounded in the silence. She was mutilated, barely alive. He was breathing heavily and wheezing, thinking aloud that Elto's body had reached its limit, because she had awakened with a strength she physically could not endure, especially due to previous injuries, and for him, she was effectively already dead. But for him, it was still worth seeing her full, true form, and Fujimura watched as everything unfolded. He refused to admit that Elto was dying. Striking his hand on the ground, he focused. If he applied the second-level hardening power to this, he could still find what he needed in a dungeon of that level. His goal was the core. He had to precisely determine its location. Just like searching for a magic stone, he remembered how Freya once said that no one had eyes like his. If they were truly unique, now was the time to prove it. Fujimura pushed the limits of his vision. Wider, deeper, more precise, and finally success, he found the pistol. His clairvoyant eye, directed at Washington, activated. With recorded coordinates, he was preparing to transfer his body exactly to that place. Meanwhile, Elto remained unconscious. Freya could only watch, frozen with fear and helplessness. Her mind refused to accept it. Elto could not disappear, thoughts were racing, memories were flashing. And then she forced her to wake up with the power of will. Her voice rose in despair. And suddenly a shot rang out. Freya's eyes snapped open. Her gaze fell on Eltikos just at the moment he began to regain consciousness. Smoke was rising from the pistol barrel. Fujimura stood over her with a smile. Declaring the end of the battle, they achieved their goal. Now they could finally relax. His eyes filled with tears, and Eltiko barely raised his thumb. Freya, overwhelmed with emotion, hurried to embrace Fujimura. She was sobbing, pressed against him, and he smiled with relief. Elsewhere, Maldik lay sprawled on the ground and was still breathing, his thoughts full of disbelief, unable to comprehend the healing spell that Fujimura had cast. A warrior who combined such high-level physical techniques with healing magic on such a scale was unprecedented. He was not just a mage with a few attributes. He was a master in many fields, something more. It was something he had never encountered before. In Maldik's last thoughts, he realized the truth. What stood before them was no longer just a human. Fujimura had become a majestic monster. He gathered the group and said it was time to contact the old ally again and finish freeing the remaining slaves. Without hesitation, he shot Vito, and the weapon's magic restored Vito's body. In response, Vito silently pointed towards the forced labor camp. The scene they approached was gloomy. Countless slaves were digging relentlessly. The man supervising them sat relaxed in a chair until Fujimura struck him from behind with a heavy wrench. The blow knocked him off balance and pushed him down to the ground. Fujimura, who stood above with a megaphone, announced freedom to the workers, and the reaction was immediate and explosive. The shackles broke, the slaves burst with joy, sincere and unrestrained. Gratitude filled the air, voices merged in unison, thanking Fujimura. They were finally free. No more forced labor, no more endless pits to dig. During the celebration, one man jokingly proposed to Freya to marry his son. Freya was confused and froze. Meanwhile, Pip carefully sniffed the air and sensed a smell. She signaled Fujimura, and they followed her. Finally, they reached the hidden cave, where they found another prison cell. Someone was locked inside, an old man, weak and motionless. Fujimura looked at it with disgust and quietly expressed contempt for those who stooped to kidnapping elderly people. Such trash, he thought, does not even deserve contempt. He quickly sawed through the bars. Having freed the man, he lifted him onto his back. Turning to the group, Fujimura carried the old man easily and carefully. When asked where he had gone, he patted the old man on the head and explained that he found him deeper in the cave because at first he mistook him for a Jizo statue, a small stone figure in Japan that represents the protector of children and travelers, and smiling, admitted how he almost left the old man behind. The old man stood calmly despite the commotion around. Freya's eyes widened in disbelief when she finally understood, and Fujimura kept joking, rubbing his bald head like a mischievous boy, and teasing that the master supposedly felt some disturbances in his power. Freya could hardly comprehend this. The old man standing before them, modest and silent, turned out to be the great sage Bonus himself. Fujimura suddenly confirmed this with surprise. The old man himself replied that it was indeed so. He was a great sage, former head of the town once known as Soluin, an unparalleled expert and master of light magic. After this, the sage sincerely addressed Fujimura and asked how he could now express gratitude for the kindness received. Everyone around them was stunned. The old sage warmly smiled at the gathered audience. Former slaves overwhelmed with emotions, they expressed relief and joy that the great sage survived, and believed that with his return they would finally have a chance to drive out the oppressive organization Zafat and restore the former peace. Near Fujimura, he noticed another group of people with upright posture and detached facial expressions, asked who they were, and Freya replied that they were nobles and bonus ministers who were also captured. Fujimura remarked that they probably trusted that sage very much, and Freya confirmed that such respect is natural for a person of that kind. Fujimura then noted that being captured was not wise for a person of such status. The philosopher flinched at this jab, and explained that he was caught while he was sleeping. Fujimura reacted skeptically. Philosophe clarified that it was Magu, and even active soldiers would have no chance in such circumstances. His face lit up with a proud expression, and he thought that, being who he was, only he could survive, no one else could endure such a trial. Fujimura remained indifferent and sarcastically brushed off the remark. As if that sage was hardly old enough to sleep so deeply, Philosota's face twisted. He called Fujimura the worst young man he had met in 300 years. Fujimura sharply replied, hinting that those centuries were probably unhappy, and Freya was confused, bowing and apologizing several times to the sage. Philosophe quietly smiled and calmed her. Seeing the actions and efforts of the group, he was ready to vouch for them. One had divine eyes, another was a demon elf. With them were also a priest of the Lantern Flame, a former knight of the Imperizer, and even a child of the White Wolf tribe. Regardless of whether it was fate or something else, the group they created was undoubtedly extraordinary. Freya blinked upon hearing about the Lantern Flame and asked the philosopher to explain. He responded with surprise. She really did not know and admitted it. And the philosopher explained that the Lantern Flame was a rare gift that with one hand created an explosive flame, and with the other healed with the same heat, giving a double beneficial effect. As he knew, only one person possessed such a gift, the current Fire Princess Saluona. He recalled that her name was Moraz von Freya or something similar. Freya froze, was stunned, and demanded to hear more. The philosopher looked at her inquisitively. She asked again if she was dead, and doubted if it was really certain. It was believed that Moraz died about 15 years ago, yes, but there were also rumors of her appearances, specifically in the Beastman nation of Fang. Freya could hardly believe what she heard. The philosopher explained more. These rumors, though old, originated from the rural area of Fang, more precisely from the village White Wolf. His gaze fell on Pip, a child of that tribe. He said that fate was at work. Fujimura smiled decisively. He made the decision immediately. The way forward was clear. Their next destination was the Beast Kingdom of Fang. Freya, still upset, asked what would happen to Izuma, and Fujimura decisively replied that if there was even the slightest hope that Mares was alive, there was no time to lose, because nothing is more valuable than the bond between a child and a father. Tears stood in Freya's eyes, and her voice trembled with gratitude as she looked at Fujimura. Fujimura turned his attention to Vito. He asked what he planned to do next. Vito barely smiled, and said that he would return to Empirizer. If he really wants to start over, he must do it right. Freya, worried, reminded him of the strictest law of the Empire, that desertion was punishable by death. Vito shrugged off with bitter humor. In his opinion, he was just a cowardly leader who ran away when problems started, and maybe that made sense. However, he remembered his path with the group, and that every day with them and the boss was far from boring. Despite who he was, he somehow began saving people and sincerely felt gratitude. Suddenly, Philosoth spoke and offered Vito a position under his leadership. Vito was stunned. Philosoth explained that people were needed for the future reconstruction, and if Vito really wanted to make amends, he had to earn forgiveness through actions. Vito objected that he was a deserter and a leader of Zafatu, and such a past would mean he would constantly be hunted, and involving Philosoph would only bring problems, but Philosoph shrugged it off. It would hide him. He turned to former slaves, and everyone nodded. Then Philosoph leaned in and asked if Vito had ever heard of hiding throughout the state. Philosoph had seen Vito's actions with his own eyes. He believed that Vito still had the determination to risk his life for a chance to regain the honor of a knight. These words struck Vito. His eyes widened. It seemed as if it was ongoing. If after all the reconstructions it still didn't work out, so be it. But it was not too late to start again. Fujimura firmly patted Vito on the back and smiled. It was a profitable deal. He laughed and reminded that mistakes are the privilege of the young. They could afford to suffer defeats again, and each time find the strength to rise. Vito remembered this laughter. It was the same laughter his father once had, and a tear rolled down his father's cheek. He quietly thanked the boss, felt relief, and agreed to the offer, this time promising not to run away anymore. Fujimura clapped his hands, after which it was time to move, and Freya willingly agreed. As soon as they began to set off, a voice from above made them stop. Vito froze. His eyes darted upward, then widened in horror. The attitude was handwoven. The face of Maelch distorted with rage. The organization was in ruins, and he expected to soon die at the hands of that man, so he decided to take everyone else down with him. Fujimura muttered under his breath, and Philosoph, grim and calm, explained that the figure was Alamumi, commander of the 6th Division of the Demon King's army, who gave Mag a cursed potion, thanks to which Philosoph was captured. Philosoph warned that the influence of Alamumi was already spreading across the continent like a shadow plague. Its goal was not just conquest, but to undermine the balance of power from within by any means. It was a strategy never seen before. It combined stealth, subversive work, and darkness from within. An unprecedented threat was growing. Melt confirmed Philosoph's analysis. He had indeed set his sights on Bonus because of his wealth. The plan was to capture the city and cut off its financial support to the front. Money obtained would be spent on mass creation of demon squads and undermining the country from within. It was a quiet but planned betrayal. One was directed not against a foreign state, but against his own compatriots. Suddenly, a surge of raw energy exploded. Eltiko's body tensed, her power broke free from control. Her eyes flared red, thin cracks crawled across them, but her power failed and she fell to the ground with a dull thud. Philassuit gloomily noted that although the body had recovered again, the mana reserves were still extremely depleted, and long bony tentacles began to grow from Maldix's back, twisting grotesquely. He moved using them as limbs, and the bony appendages slid across the ground with unnatural ease. It seems that when a person is cornered, they often resort to forbidden arts. The powers were so destructive that they took the life of the one who used them. A terrible magic awakened. Freya was confused and began to doubt the existence of such power. Philosotus was silent, and that was enough. Then from the secret depths of the earth, long-buried skeletons began to stir, summoned by a dreadful spell. Skeleton warriors emerged from the ground and approached him one by one. They merged into his body as he gave his life as fuel. Bone struck bone, corpses piled into his interior. He was no longer human, but a fused monstrosity, a great pulsating death. Fujimura cursed at him, realizing that it was madness. Maldic declared the act final, the end, no escape. Former slaves watching from afar were paralyzed with fear. The monster grew to colossal proportions. Its weight and shape cast a shadow like a falling star. Vito watched in horror. Above them loomed not just a spell, but a bomb acting under the pressure of corpses, a weapon of total destruction. The pulsation of arcane energy became deafening. A terrifying roar echoed through the chamber. Vito understood the truth. The entire labyrinth was on the verge of collapse. Philosoth pulled himself together and summoned a flickering row of light barriers, his old combat formation of a light wall. Many years had passed since he last addressed him. A huge force loomed over them, but he stood firm. Freya watched with admiration, for the philosopher, a great sage himself, was single-handedly holding back that monstrous construct of death. The philosopher resolutely said that his spirit would never break. But suddenly a sharp crack sounded from his back. He grimaced. The spell quickly drained mana, and he could no longer hold on for long, and Fujimura, always the realist, said that the philosopher had just dislocated his back. Wasting no time, he grabbed Freya's hand and said that it was now or never, and from such a distance she could shoot at full power, aiming the weapon with her hand. Fujimura offered to become her right hand. Freya, holding her breath, agreed. The spectators doubted that such a small weapon could affect something so large. Fujimura shouted at the philosopher to lower the wall. Panic swept through the group. The philosopher hesitated. Then he accepted Fujimura's challenge, because the barrier wouldn't hold anyway, and maybe betting everything on his crazy confidence was worth the risk. Everyone is watching the pair, holding their breath. Fujimura lent Freya some of his energy, and told her to show everyone what a one-armed hero is capable of. Vito repeated the word hero. Fujimura Grint felt that this time it would work. He urged Freya to give everything and make all the shots she had. Freya nodded. She pulled the trigger. Fujimura uttered the spell Voidal Sky sixfold, and an explosion roared through the air with a rumble, raising smoke and wind, and when everything calmed down, the monster looming over them disappeared, leaving behind a huge hole. Vito stared wide-eyed, froze in surprise, and smiled. Nothing could survive after that. Freya, Pip, and even Eltico were left speechless by the scale of the attack. Fujimura laughed and teased them. They were completely exhausted. It seemed that when they return, not only their equipment, but also they themselves would need rest and recovery. The philosopher smiled. He said that thanks to Fujimura's exquisitely made tools, they survived this battle at all. Freya blushed, her thoughts turned to Fujimura. Nobles and ministers who had previously doubted stepped forward and sincerely bowed, expressed their deepest gratitude on behalf of the bonus, announced support for Fujimura's group, and promised to help in any way they could on their future journey. Fujimura thanked them and said that next time in the city, they would all have a good meal together. Then he turned to Vito and called him. Fujimura said he placed great hopes on him. If Vito dared to stand against 100 people, he would be capable of anything. Tears appear in Vito's eyes. He remembered his father's voice. Go forward, Vito, and listen to your heart. Father believed in him. He called Vito his treasure. Vito cried, tears rolled down his cheeks. Fujimura gently patted him on the back, and Vito promised not to repeat past mistakes. Someday, when he becomes strong enough, he will return and fight alongside Fujimura again. Fujimura, up. As always tired, he said he was starving and suggested everyone go to the city, but then suddenly something occurred to him. He suddenly screamed in despair. Freya, surprised, asked if everything was okay, and Fujimura urgently turned to the sage and asked if he knew what tobacco was. Velosoth turned around with theatrical innocence. Claiming he had no idea, Fujimura tried to explain. Dry leaves can be lit, inhaled, and smoke will come out. The philosopher continued to pretend and again insisted he did not know. Irritated, Fujimura demanded that he think better and called him an old fart. He snorted contemptuously and muttered what kind of sage he was if he didn't even know what tobacco was. and added that maybe to become a sage, it was enough to have chronic back pain. Phillies Out smiled crookedly and said that even if he didn't know what tobacco was, Fujimura would be the last person he would tell. Others, yes. But not him. Freya was frightened and shouted at Fujimura when he suddenly rushed to the sage and stood close in front of him. His voice broke with emotion as he accused Felisoth, that tiny hope, that one chance, which was the only thing leading him through this whole crazy path. And now it was gone. Freya was embarrassed and could not understand why one simple tobacco could break someone so much. Fujimura's reaction began to scare her. Felisoth just laughed and threw a rude joke, hinting that the younger generation, especially those down there who are not yet mature, should be more careful with words. Fujimura squinted and cut off, saying that Felisoth himself was not in better shape. His head was so shiny it could serve as a mirror. Felisoth's face twisted with offense. He declared that he still had a few hairs left. Fujimoriskov said that was not something to be proud of, and called him a wrinkled old man. Freya turned to Elto, asking him to intervene and stop their childish quarrel. But Elto did not interrupt. She just stood and smiled gently. Memories of her mother came alive in her heart. Her mother's words echoed and remained alive, even funny for both of us. Elto recalled the words about how one day it would be possible to smile sincerely, feeling the weight of this desire that reached her through the name Lafrel, which means smiling face. At that moment she smiled broadly. Everyone turned to her in surprise, and she quietly confirmed to herself the determination to fulfill this desire and carry the name Lafrel with pride. And truly smile freely. Fujimura gasped, Nagiji smiled, and that day everything happened. The largest criminal syndicate on the continent Zafat was destroyed not by the army, not by the nobles, but by a single group of adventurers. They did not know this, but someone was watching them from the shadow in the distance, and the figure quietly chuckled. The plan failed, the man muttered contemptuously. It seemed all his efforts to deliver the mail to Hamag were in vain. People, as always, were a disappointment. Next to him hung a small, ugly demon resembling a floating brain, and he agreed, and a man named Alamumi thought that the weapon they saw at the end was amazing, so he asked the creature nearby if it had ever heard of gnomes. He remembered that it was an ancient race of master blacksmiths, whose craft was so perfect it angered the gods and led to their extinction. Every modern SS-class weapon, he thought, originated from those legendary forges. In fact, there were even sacred weapons that are still rare and surpass the SS class, similar to Magu. These were not just tools but unique relics and lost treasures created with such complex construction that modern blacksmiths could not even reproduce them. They were creations of something non-human, something divine. The demon hovering in the air pondered this. The idea of an ancient artifact stronger than the SS class sounded too mythical. Aliamu explained that such treasures, they say, were forged by the very first of the dwarves, their founder. He who first struck the anvil with the hammer, the blacksmith above all the others. The Great Twist, as the legend called him. Myth, foundation, and possibly future threat. The territory of humans bordered the territory of demons, and between them ran a border known as the Absolute Front of Edzima. In the fortress, the Knight Tension Brute approached General Ruel and urgently reported that the second defensive gates had been breached. It happened quite recently. Revel the Cunning, an imperial general with a sharp mind and an even sharper instinct, stopped to recall who was entrusted with those gates. It was Amista, the Iron, the righteous general. The knight showed that Amista had temporarily left her post to reinforce the third gates, and the enemy took advantage of this gap to capture the second gates. Ruel muttered to herself, not surprised. This is typical of Amista. She helps others even if it is tactically risky. From above came a mocking, thoughtful voice. A figure sitting higher than the others laughed and disdainfully called the situation cute. Ruel immediately recognized him. Saul, you are unsinkable in Flightum. Flightum's words flowed with carefree audacity. He loudly repeated that Adzuma is still a land of opportunity. He thought that if he himself had repelled that second gate, he would have earned style points, even if only half. Ruel turned to him with distrust. She saw that Flightum did not realize the scale of what he was saying. She reminded him that the advantage in battle depends on the right strategy and the number of forces. Proper planning was needed, not atrix. Flightum waved it off. He did not care. Being a Salyuan, he was a mercenary warrior. Salyuans like him were not bound by protocols or orders. They went to Zuma for promises of freedom, glory, wealth, and status that the highest-level missions gave. Compared to them, even knights seemed harsh and constrained. He added that even Heflin appeared, but the prize that man sought was of a completely different kind. Ruler agreed, recalling that Heflin almost constantly guarded the fourth gates, which were under the command of General Eklina. Flightum smiled knowingly, of course, and then warned those who listened. Heflin was a fool. A pursuer in disguise. As soon as Heflin learned about the breakthrough of the second gate, Flightum was sure that he would rush there to impress the female general, and since it was not yet completed, Flightum decided to act first, arriving there before Heflin. He will attract all the attention. Ravel, worried, asked to go with him. If there was a demonic general there, it would be too dangerous even for a Soloant to go alone, but before she could finish, Flightum interrupted her. She did not understand. That was the point. If Flightum manages to do it alone, he will become a legend. The knights around them stood with their mouths agape and could not believe what they saw. Revel asked dryly what kind of legend he imagined himself to be and whether he considered himself the god of war. No, rather he was turning into a legendary fool. But inside, despite her harsh words, Ryul was enchanted. He seemed funny, even a little crazy, but radiated a freedom that broke rules, fear, and reason, and she felt herself blush, pressing against the well. Flydom then loudly and dramatically declared that the legend of Phldom had just begun. He jumped from the fortress and rushed forward at incredible speed. Ryul could only sigh and mutter the word Flydom. And all his glory was now going elsewhere, meanwhile in the royal palace. The king could not believe it and barely stood on his feet because the messenger had just brought incredible news. Zafat himself was destroyed, and it all happened in one day, the messenger assured. The rumors matched. The operation was carried out by a squad led by a woman known for her skill with weapons. It was also confirmed that a young man traveled with the group. The king pondered the rumors, the firearms, the young man, and the fall of Zafat, and his thoughts immediately turned to Fujimura and Freya. Of course, it was them. He laughed quietly because it was exactly the showy mess he expected from those chasing the title of hero. He decided to wait, no matter how long it took, until Fujimura returned. When that day came, they would hold a banquet again, like at their first meeting. Suddenly, Fujimura appeared and announced his return. The king did not believe for a moment. He thought it was just imagination, that he was remembering. But no, it was real. Fujimura was really here. He brought with him the remains of a huge skeleton and presented them to the king as a gift. According to Fujimura, it was a grilled ray and went well with alcohol. Without wasting time, he casually waved goodbye and said he was in a hurry and had to leave. The king shouted for him to wait because he still had many questions, but Fujimura had already disappeared. He returned to his workshop, surrounded by stones and parts. Fujimura began examining the acquired materials. With Bonus's help, he was able to get magical stones that could not be found here. This once again confirmed that Bonus truly deserved the reputation of the main trading center of the continent. He looked at Freya's prosthetic arms. There was a lot of work ahead. The machine needed repairing. All the equipment had to be improved, and now they had to experiment with the cores they had obtained, and images of the beaten Freya and Elto surfaced in his mind. The next updates were to focus on defense. They were too vulnerable. For now, he began experimenting with the settings. He was getting better and better at using his eyes, those special ones that no one else had. He needed to use them to the fullest. Core extraction is a unique ability granted by the world only to him. Working, he gradually realized that the cores he was dealing with were much more complex than he initially thought. But that suited him. He wanted to show them and the whole world the soul of a master, so the work continued. That same day, Altiko, Freya, and Pip received newly made equipment. Boots, weapons, and bracelets. The king looked at the results with admiration, beamed with joy, and hugged Fujimura. Freya, touched, said she would take good care of it. As they were getting into the machine, the king asked if they were really going to leave so soon, and Fujimura confirmed it because there was a lot to do and their journey was not over yet, and the king inquired where they were heading next. Fujimura Grand announced that this is the country of Fangava, specifically the village of White Wolf. With the last wave, the car drove away. The king repeated the name, White Wolf. An official nearby explained that among the Beastfolk tribes, White Wolf was one of the 3 great clans, along with Golden Falcon and Black Lion, and all of them were famed for great combat strength. The White Wolf tribe lived in a village deep in the forest, known for numerous disappearances. It was a hellish land where only the strongest survived, and even worse. The White Wolf tribe was famous for its hatred of humans. The king froze, stunned. Then he shouted Fujimura's name in disbelief. Meanwhile, Fujimura's car was already approaching the forest. They stopped the car at the edge of the jungle. He got out and surveyed the area. They had come this far, but they could not go further by road. From now on, they would have to go on foot. Freya immediately noticed this place. Finger Toratori, the jungle of Great Vern. A colossal green massif, said to occupy almost a third of the Beastfolk country, located near the demonic kingdom and almost unexplored, still hiding secrets untouched by humans. Dense, wild, merciless. They needed to move very carefully. Suddenly, heavy breathing sounded among the leaves, and Pip's sharp ears immediately heard it. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the field of vision, pursued by a huge dino-like beast. The man was clearly in trouble. He complained about his misfortune, and today, his stone for communicating with animals failed him. He was completely defenseless. As he ran past, Fujimura indifferently grabbed him by the collar, and the man panicked, loudly asking who this Fujimura was, and did not notice that he was about to be eaten. He shouted at Fujimura to let him go. If that beast caught him, it would tear him to the bones. The creature lunged just at the moment when the man screamed again, begging to be released. But Fujimura Thomas, ever calmly, struck the beast on the head with his key. The creature fell instantly. The man froze in shock. Fujimura simply ordered the beast to be silent. He was in the middle of negotiations. Immediately after, Fujimura became the victim of the beast. A wave of huge insects rushed at them. One of them called them beast insects. In response, Elto unhesitatingly summoned her power. With one destructive blow of the superstorm, she crushed the swarm under her boots. Fujimura was caught off guard by the power of her attack on such small targets. She doubted the logic because such enormous power seemed excessive. The threat remained. The insects continued crawling toward her, and the swarm looked ready to tear her to the bones. Fujimura, however, remained calm. He noticed that their clothing was unusual. The clothing was enchanted to resist the elements and had automatic healing, so simple attacks were powerless. He called this clothing Fujimura Kakoromo and was clearly proud of the craftsmanship. His companion froze silently in amazement at the elegance, while Fujimura boasted even more, explaining that this clothing was created in collaboration with leading bonus masters. The discovery by Fujimura impressed the listener even more. The clothing contained powerful magical stones, which he carefully processed and embedded into lightweight plate armor. The explanation became more complex, and Fujimura detailed how he extracted the cores of the magical stones, purified them, and transformed them into usable armor. It seemed incredible, but the results spoke for themselves. A strong, light, and powerful thing. Its value was undeniable, almost priceless. When more mistakes appeared, Fujimura changed tactics, called Freya, and ordered her to prepare the next attack. For him, these creatures were still just beasts. Raw force was often the only language they understood. Their attack lit up the sky and cleared the wave. Fujimura joined again for you. They were clearly satisfied with the result, and their companion looked worried. He was clearly confused by what he saw. Later, deeper in the forest, the traveler examined a cracked bullet made of crimson crystal. There were cracks and signs of overload on the surface. It used to be a magical stone for taming beasts, but now it is exhausted, and Fujimura noticed its damage, acknowledging that even enchanted tools suffer from poor quality. The traveler, introducing himself as Bridge, said that he is a blacksmith and merchant traveling the continent. So the question of Fujimura explained why they entered such a treacherous forest. Bridges said that that season, the most important things for merchants were connections, information, trade routes, and trust. Traveling through various lands, especially little-studied ones like Fangawa, he could find unused opportunities, rare resources, and unique cultures. This forest was a true treasure trove of unknown magical stones. Bridges pondered the day's events. He had spent 2 years making his way through the forest and finally reached the mysterious village of White Wolf. When he ran out of protective talismans, he had no choice but to return to the city. The chance to go back was uncertain. Fujimura, smiling, called it Bridges' lucky day and jokingly called him a handsome man, perhaps both a compliment and a light irony. Their attention shifted to the village of White Wolves as the next goal. Fujimura, determined to get there, seriously asked if Bridges would agree to be their guide on the condition of a guarantee of his safety. The proposal was met with a flash of realization in Bridges' eyes, appreciating the protection their combat skills provided. He quickly liked the idea. They sealed their unspoken agreement with a handshake. Bridges, accepting the role, pledged to be their bridge to the hard-to-reach village. The village was hidden deep in the vast expanses of Verna, which were difficult to cross. Bridges navigated by teleportation stones scattered throughout the forest, and over time learned their order and approximate locations. Although the process was painstaking and expensive, one mistake could lead to dangerous consequences. The situation was complicated by the fact that the White Wolves were not a simple tribe. They belonged to one of the 3 great clans and had deep hostility toward humans, but the temptation of Fangazu's wealth, its famous gold, silver, and numerous undiscovered relics, was irresistible. Bridges saw huge potential if trade could be established with the White Wolves. It was not only a matter of diplomacy, but a unique opportunity for great profit, and for an experienced merchant like him, such chances were too rare to ignore. After a difficult journey, they finally reached the outskirts of the destination point. Bridge undoubtedly recognized it. Ahead was the village of the White Wolves. He warned that the White Wolves were hostile to people, so one had to be careful, but before he could finish his words, Fujimura had already disappeared. Sliding along the path to the village without hesitation, Bridge was frightened by the sudden movement. Fujimura did not know the customs and culture of the tribe. Still, he burst in as if only urgency gave him the right to do so, but noticing Fujimura's decisiveness, Bridge could only assume that he had a plan to prevent possible chaos. Having no other choice, Bridge followed him. Almost immediately, the air tensed as masked warriors of the White Wolves surrounded them. The group was clearly wary. Bridge urgently whispered and asked about Fujimura's plan, hoping he had won. Fujimura remained calm and confident that the presence of children and women would deter immediate hostility. But Bridge was much less sure, worried for his own safety, and silently praying that no one would provoke the White Wolves. Under pressure, the girl tightly grabbed Fujimura's hand. One of the White Wolves stepped out of the crowd and suspiciously said that although they did not know how it happened, among the strangers was one of their long-lost relatives. The rest called for their elder. When he appeared, the atmosphere changed. Fujimura, looking him straight in the eyes, said he had come to return a young member of their tribe who had been kidnapped, and gently placed his hand on the child's head. A silent conversation took place between him and the elder. There were no words, only a heavy gaze that carried the weight of what was about to happen. The elder made a decision. The child would be taken under guardianship, but their distrust of people would not change, so the people must leave the child. Bridge tried to intervene to explain the difficulties they had to endure to reach the village, but before he could express his request, spears were thrown in his direction as a clear warning. The elder drew their attention to the ground beneath their feet. Beneath the platform stretched a gray field, and he asked if they understood the significance of what they were standing on. Bridge recognized it as a burial site, although he could not even roughly say how many were buried there. The elder told the story of the distrust of the White Wolves. Unlike other tribes, the White Wolves, with a rare lineage and great strength, always lived under the constant threat of destruction from human clans. That threat became a reality during the incident with the Black Dragon a few years ago. A huge dragon controlled by humans devastated their village, indiscriminately killing warriors, women, and children, and the survivors were driven from their homes and forced to hide. In the center of the grave lay a huge battle axe. Fujimura noticed it immediately. The elder recognized it as the axe once used by their ancient champion, the legendary warrior of the White Wolves who once saved the world, Lord Lupus, and this sacred relic became a symbol of the village's pride and resilience, but it too was desecrated by human hands. For clans like the White Wolves, weapons were not just tools but their soul. They were passed down from generation to generation, especially when carried by a veteran, and each such item carried history and honor. Desecration of such a relic was considered an unforgivable insult and a manifestation of human selfishness. Bridge, feeling the full weight of the events, admitted to himself that the physical and emotional wounds would probably not heal, and the elder, drawing a heavy conclusion, said that now they understood why no one could trust humans anymore. Then Fujimura stepped forward and suggested that if the people who broke their pride no longer deserved trust, then trust could be placed in those who would restore it. A bold proposal hung in the air. He would return what was lost not with words but with actions. The elder, surprised, asked what that meant. The greatest deeds were displayed everywhere. The little white wolf cub looked at the axe with shining eyes and a racing heart. Nearby, an adult white wolf noticed this and said that the cub had come again to look at the axe. The cub turned around, happy to see his father. The father began to explain that these axes belonged to the legendary White Wolf, who fought alongside the hero's squad and defeated the Demon King. These were the axes of Lord Lupus, the pride and treasure of their village White Wolf. It is said that with them one can cut through the earth with a single strike. Their people had revered and protected her for generations. The father told about his path and how he dedicated his whole life to becoming a warrior worthy of this axe. For him, the axe was a symbol and the guiding star of the tribe. The boy smiled even brighter. He said that one day he would also become a warrior worthy of the axe. His father encouraged him, gave him the name Fulman, and told him to become a warrior who would not fall to either man or demon. Turning to the present, the village elder addressed Fujimura and asked if he could really fix the axe and return their pride. Fujimura confidently confirmed. Bridge expressed doubt and, as a specialist, advised to abandon this matter now. He noted that the axe was practically destroyed. The thick metal had cracked and rusted through, and the embedded magic stone had exhausted its resource. To reforge it, it would have to be completely melted down and started from scratch. Moreover, they probably did not have a mold for such an old artifact, and the stone had degraded so much that it was impossible to determine what it had once been like. Fujimura activated his ability to analyze Kaizakigen. His vision detected a glow inside the stone, and he was able to recognize its true nature. He said that it was an Earth-type breaker stone with crystals tuned to control the Earth. Examining the axe further, he established another connection with the floating stone. His conclusions were interrupted by the roar of a warrior standing behind the elder, angered because Fujimura dared to touch the axe. But the elder stopped him and instead addressed Fujimura, asking how he learned about the nature of the magic stone. Fujimura simply replied that he sees it with his special eye and promised that if he gets one day, he will restore the axe as if it were new. Others reacted with distrust, as if they thought the boy was mocking them because of the words about one day, and the elder remained silent, his thoughts briefly returning to his own childhood and to the fascination with youthful dreams. He carefully thought through the decision, but if Fujimura fails, his courage to touch the sacred rituals will cost him dearly. The man behind the elders moved again, but Fujimura confidently agreed to the terms and took the tool from his spatial storage. Caused admiration on the bridge, then Fujimura put on gloves. Announced that he would start with arc welding. Arc welding is a process that uses the heat of an electric arc to melt and join metals. This was explained in technical detail, and the arc creates a temperature from 2,000 to 5,000 degrees Celsius. The first step was to remove rust from the parts that needed to be welded, then seam welding was performed. Preforming of materials is done for a strong and clean weld seam. Machine joints provide maximum strength of the metal parts connection. Bridge silently admired. Fujimura warned the spectators to stay away due to the brightness of the arc flame. He distributed protective face shields to those who insisted on watching. The principle was first come, first served. 3 members of the White Wolf tribe gladly took one each. Fujimura assessed the damaged edge of axis and noted that the thickness at the thickest point was from 15 to 20. To ensure the required strength of the weld seam, he will increase the electric current and make 4 to 5 welding passes. Each pass will be a continuous seam along the joint. Preparation completed. He started the arc. The burst of energy frightened the beastmen, and the place looked like lightning. Fujimura initially secured the base material so that it would not shift. The goal was a weld with full penetration without using a backing plate. He proceeded to the first layer, carefully adjusting the height, movement, and speed of the electrodes and monitoring the weld pool, the molten area formed during welding, and when the first pass was finished. He removed the slag, the waste that separates during welding, because if left, the slag can spoil the weld, and scattered residues called spatter can cause additional defects. With the second layer, Fujimura increased the current and performed the weaving electrode technique to ensure complete fusion. Layer by layer, he continued the process, welding, removing sagging, checking the pool end. The bead, a semi-cylindrical metal seam left after each pass. The air buzzed with the sound of molten metal. Bridge watched, mesmerized. Fujimura continued confidently. He firmly attached the cylinder all around to strengthen it. Then he cleaned the rust residues, polished the surface, and removed excess overlaps. He treated the metal to prevent rusting and added decorative finishing. Regarding the broken magic stone, he said they needed a full replacement, and for that, full support from Bonus would be required. Elsewhere, the elder Gremps was bathing in a tub when his communication device suddenly lit up. A voice sounded and checked if he was still alive. The surprised old man reacted. It was the voice from the earring given to him by Fujimura. Fujimura explained that it was a communication device. He apologized for the sudden contact and began listing specific stones that needed to be prepared immediately. When they are ready, he will come to pick them up. The elder was left stunned by the stones. Bridge, watching the scene, asked Freya who Fujimura was talking to, and she casually replied that it was probably Lord Felisat, the great sage of Bonus. At first he did not notice, but when he understood, Bridge was amazed. The Bonus was very far away. He could not believe that Fujimura had a direct connection with a person of such a level. Moreover, he had never heard of such a convenient magic of communication. He wanted one, and in response, 3 women traveling with Fujimura proudly showed their radios. Fujimura said that thanks to the elder's connections and additional help, the magic stones would arrive very quickly. He returned to work, saying it was time to finish everything. Later, the bridge was energetically washed, Fujimura grand. The axe was ready, the elder's eye widened. At that moment he was overwhelmed by childhood memories, the admiration and reverence he once felt. What he saw seemed new. It was the same relic he had washed with reverence as a boy. The beastmen quietly whispered in amazement. One said he had never seen such a shine. Another called it a miracle. Someone even noted that it was an exact image of the hero he remembered from youth. perhaps now even more so. Fujimura asked the elder to express his opinion, noting that the gilding and restored core were a small bonus from him. Bridge was stunned. Fujimura not only restored the legendary techniques in one day, but also performed techniques that surpassed everything Bridge had seen before. He trembled with emotion. Bridge bowed low and pressed his forehead to the ground, calling Fujimura master. He said that Fujimura's skill, his dedication and spirit impressed him more than he could express, and begged to become Fujimura's apprentice. Fujimura refused without hesitation. Bridgewind could not accept this. He turned to Freya, called her dear sister, and asked her to persuade Fujimura. Freya blinked, surprised by such an address. The elder spoke. As a token of gratitude for his help, and in honor of the case regarding the white wolf puppy, he announced that the people of Fujimura were proudly allowed to freely enter and exit the village of White Wolf. Fujimura's companions responded with applause, and the elder added that they would never forget the mortal debt they owed him, like the path of the white wolves. Now it became clear that the strength of people should not be underestimated, the elder thought, wondering where Fujimura got such strength, and Fujimura smiled and explained that it was not magic. What they had just seen was not a spell or a supernatural phenomenon, it was a simple craft technique. The elder thanked Fujimura for the service and emphasized that even this gesture was part of the White Wolf Code. Fujimura's group felt a moment of relief and joy. However, the elder's tone changed when he asked them to depart immediately. He explained that their arrival came at an extremely troubling time. In the village of White Wolf, a split occurred. Some were traditionalists who preserved customs and way of life. Others were radicals who sought to use power to impose their will on the world. The village was mired in conflict, and people found themselves between two ideologies. Although the elder and traditionalists agreed to accept outsiders like Fujimura's group, they did not forgive the radicals. The child under their care, named Pipsqueak, had parents who belonged to the radical wing. This alone aroused suspicion. Then the messenger interrupted. They reported that the Saikyou warrior was captured, and he was wounded by the enemy with a knife. He raised his weapon. Undoubtedly, this was one of their incursions, and deliberately abandoning him was a cruel message. Pipsqueak was clearly confused. Fujimura quickly assessed the situation and noticed the instability of the Pips family. Then he asked the elder to lead them to the enemy camp, hoping to speak with them directly. His intention was not supported by traditionalists who considered this idea outrageous. The elder warned that every attempt at parley would likely lead to Fujimura's death. Next there was another village, the elder continued, where a human clan lived, famous for killing dragons. In that village lived a Saikyou, a powerful being known as the Princess of Flame. Freya reacted with surprise to this name. The elder confirmed this. This woman once saved their village from the Black Dragon and was considered a heroine, but now she has directed her power to inspire the youth to revolt and has effectively become the leader of the radicals. Looking back, the elder feared that even her previous heroic deed might have been part of a larger manipulation. Fujimura smiled upon hearing that name. She was a notable figure known as the Flame Princess. This only strengthened his resolve. He said that he also had business with her. The elder, confused, asked if Fujimura already knew this woman, and Fujimura admitted that he was not sure and that they would have to check it when meeting her. Despite everything, he said that not even the White Wolves would stop them, and the elder, accepting his determination, yielded. He offered them a guide, the strongest warrior of the village Shaga. The elder introduced him as the one who would accompany them. Shaga expressed dissatisfaction and said he did not want to accompany the people, but the elder applied the code for the second time, so Shaga had no choice and remained silent, and Bridge, full of ambition, also insisted on joining. He dreamed of great success, and there was something in Fujimura's group that radiated possibility. He felt that a trip with them could be the chance he had been waiting for. Freya thoughtfully pondered Bridge's ambitions. Meanwhile, Fujimura allowed him to do as he wished, but with his words made it clear that he did not take Bridges seriously. Bridges was surprised by such frankness. Elto, who was observing the conversation, smiled in his direction and noticed his recklessness. She warned him not to jump ahead. In Bridges' thoughts, the situation was becoming simply more interesting. There were dragons and Solowants. Everything hinted that their adventure was growing into something much bigger. Eventually, the group reached the outskirts of another village. Hidden under the trees, they watched the settlement. Shaga identified this place as a fortress of radicals, and although he masked their scent to avoid detection, he warned everyone to stay alert. Fujimura asked Freya if she was ready, and they might already be approaching a reunion with her mother. Freya felt ready, but inside doubt did not subside, and it seemed to her that ahead awaited not her mother. The woman she remembered did not like conflicts and would never have caused a split in the village. Freya suspected that someone was using her mother's name and reputation. Someone who had appropriated the title Princess of Flame for their own purposes. But if that was so, that person surely knew something about her real mother, and Fujimura understood this. Smiling, he gave a sign that they would go to confront the Princess of Fire to expose her true intentions. Before they could say anything, an axe suddenly flew towards them, and Fujimura reacted quickly, using his K to intercept it. And to stop in midair, the ambush began. A figure emerged from the shadow of a tree. Radical found them. She growled when she was revealed. Shagawa recognized the attacker and called her Jija. Suddenly Gija rushed at them. Fujimura met her attack. Ki against axe, their weapons clashed with great force. She retreated. He immediately drew another axe and threw it with deadly accuracy. It almost hit Shagu. Jia attacked again and collided with Shagu, who responded with a counterattack. The two warriors separated again, and Jiji jumped back into the trees, sighed, and caught her breath. Her strength and speed were evident. Even Fujimura behaved cautiously, so this opponent was not ordinary. Then more footsteps were heard. Many enemies arrived. Shagestead stood firmly next to Fujimura's group as the radicals approached. One of them called out to Shaga and asked why he was here. She fixed her gaze on Pip, and contempt appeared on her face. She called Pip the shame of the White Wolf. Her look was sharp and condemning. Now she understood. Even Shaga had brought this so-called coward with him. Pip's eyes filled with tears. Fujimura got angry. He sharply responded to the radical woman who insulted Pip because her arrogance outraged him. He demanded an explanation of who gave her the right to judge and insult others. He was not going to leave it so easily. However, Shaga replied that the radical had the right to do so, and this remark only increased the tension. Pip shouted, "Calling for Mom." Fujimura was stunned by this word. He muttered the word Mom in disbelief in his mind. Pip's face shone with hope. It was the face of a child who believed they had found their father or mother, but the woman said nothing. Fujimura became increasingly worried. He could not accept that Pip called that person her mother. With tears in her eyes, Pip called for Mom. Fujimura and Freya were left speechless. Pip's mother was silent for a moment, then replied coldly. She stated that it was already too late. Pip ran away in fear, turning away from her home. In her eyes, the White Wolf clan had no place for the weak. She renounced Pip and called her true name Lanalua. She ordered her never to appear before her again. This severed their bond as father and child. Pete broke down and cried. Fujimura struck his weapon against the tree, and a loud explosion sounded, shocking everyone. Outbursts of outrage shocked both radicals and traditionalists. Fujimura was noticeably enraged. He could not tolerate the harsh rejection that Pip had just experienced. He thought about everything Pip had gone through. All the hardships she endured alone had marked her small, fragile body. He said that a little compassion wouldn't hurt. He directly challenged the mother's cruelty. Pip's mother responded disdainfully, asking what Fujimura would do if she refused to show kindness, and dismissed him, calling him simply a lonely man. Tension rose. Freya tried to calm the situation and asked everyone not to make rash decisions, but first to discuss the matter not only for Pip's sake, but also for the fate of the village. Pip's mother mocked this proposal. The radicals sided with her. Discussion made no sense to them. They had not forgotten the losses they suffered. A comrade was killed allegedly by the treacherous methods of the traditionalists. Her words were full of insult and hostility. Fujimura, puzzled, turned to Shaga and asked what the real difference between the two factions was, and Shaga calmly replied that most likely the radicals died from beasts in the forest, because their only real advantages were lies and cowardice. Pip's mother concluded that they were truly incompatible, like oil and water, never to mix. Ultimately, this would be decided by the traditional leaders' contest under the full moon. All decisions about the future of the village will be made there. Fujimura was surprised by this. Shaga supported the idea. He considered the contest the perfect way to find out which side truly represents the spirit of the White Wolf. He turned to Fujimura and said it was time to return. The confrontation was over for now. Night fell and the group set up camp deep in the forest, while Fujimura, still angry, vented his frustration. He had never heard of any leadership competition before, and moreover, they completely forgot to ask about the Fire Princess. Shagure assured him, as a representative, Princess Flame would definitely appear at the contest. He further explained that according to the rules, 4 representatives would fight for dominance, and those who lost must swear full obedience to the winner in honor of the White Wolves. Shagas said that this was exactly why the elder wanted them to leave, because even after victory, the radicals might not recognize the result, and the threat of bloody conflict loomed. Rising, Shaga warned once again that they should not interfere. This is an internal struggle that only the White Wolves can resolve. Bridget agreed with Shaga. He insisted that he must preserve his health for future plans and asked the others to go with him. But Fujimura refused. He had already made a commitment. This was not the time to retreat, especially because of the unresolved mystery surrounding Pip and her mother. He turned to Bridge and said that he could leave if he really wanted to. Bridge, confused, looked to his lord. The night of the full moon came, and both factions, radicals and traditionalists, gathered for the decisive contest. Shigawa was present, as was Jizha, and Fujimura with his men stood among them. The moment had come. Everyone gathered for the battle that would decide the fate of the White Wolf clan. The traditionalists whispered among themselves upon seeing the opposing side. It was a radical faction. Fujimura looked over the people sitting opposite. And it turned out that one of them was the Princess of Fire. At that moment Freya froze, and the elder held his axe. The start of the competition was announced. It was a 4-on-4 team battle that was to determine the heir to the royal throne of the White Wolf clan. According to their ancient code of honor, everyone was obliged to abide by the decision, and the royal decree was unquestionable. Even the joint will of the factions could not overturn it. Bridget was struck by the seriousness of the situation, and he understood that this clash would decide who would become the next ruler. The elder officially introduced 4 representatives of the traditionalist faction. Shaga will shoot Kakaki and himself. Fujimura was embarrassed when the elder appeared, mentally mocking that the old man entering the fight already meant inevitable defeat. Freya quickly stopped him from saying more. From the radical side, their representatives were announced as Jia, Vigil, and Amaru. And the Princess of Flame. Pips's mother, Jaya, looked coldly at her daughter. Her eyes were piercing and impenetrable. Amaru expressed his concern to Jaya and reminded her of the long search for her daughter. They imagined that in the worst case, it could end in bloodshed. If Linnea got involved, it would be bad, but Jija remained indifferent. She had already warned her daughter to stay away. It was already too late. She believed that her daughter no longer turned to her for help after she had driven her away, and she knew well that she was the reason Lanalu left the village. Hatred was inevitable. Amaru understood this. All that remained was to fulfill his warrior duty. Together, they would fight under the banner of the Princess of Fire and would not allow anyone to erase the pain left by the Black Dragon. Jaya agreed and was unwavering in her conviction. The elder began the duel, announcing Vigil as the first warrior to fight for the radicals. The crowd of radicals erupted in applause. The elder turned to announce the traditionalist fighter, but froze in disbelief. All 4 representatives of the traditionalists were already lying unconscious on the ground, knocked out before the fight began. The radicals were equally stunned. Then Fujimura stepped forward and introduced himself. Even his comrades were stunned by what he did. Vigil demanded explanations, was angry and confused by Fujimura's interference, and began insulting him. But before he could finish, Fujimura struck him hard on the head with a wrench, and Vigil immediately fell. Among the radical faction, outrage spread. They did not believe what Fujimura had just done, but Fujimura made it clear that he would not allow this senseless battle to drag on any longer. The rules changed. From now on, everyone is against him, and whoever survives will win. He warned them to be on guard, because if they are not careful, he might become their king.